Moonless Morn. Chapter 1. Snowfall Encounters. The girl ran. Though her lungs burned with each step that crunched into the packed mountain path, gasps profound enough to hear even through the subdued effect of snowfall, she ran. Her attire no doubt contributed to her body's protests, for there was far more of her tanned skin to be seen than there was cloth. It starkly marked her as one who hailed from a foreign land, and yet the coldness in her eyes and coal shade to her hair did equally as much to melt her into the darkened storm surrounding her.
There's enough to fence me in from every angle, but the wind tells me to keep on ahead.
Wolves with frames 3 times greater than any normal pack were in pursuit, their eyes bloodshot and their chase unrelenting. In the midst of the chase, the girl would pivot and fire a bolt from her bowgun. This had no effect in slowing her pursuers, but neither did it slow her. When the moment was right, she would twist in the air, fire, and let the momentum of her shot thrust her backward till she landed and pushed onward. Her agile, wild motions held the practiced polish of one who had long challenged and prevailed mountainous terrain. The wolves pursued despite this, charging over the brethren felled by her bolts with an obsession that elicited from her a strange twang of compassion. That they didn't stop now, she imagined, must have meant that they couldn't stop, that someone had set them on this trail and made it a matter of survival.
Guess I'm not the only one with my life on the line here.
But compassion would never triumph over obstinance. Patting the book secured in a waist pouch with her bow-held hand, while clutching a cylindrical trinket around her neck between her other bolt-ready fingers, she continued. The elements knew something of obstinance. The thinning air as she climbed upward, the wind-swept snow, now more ice than powder, the numbness of her upper body from both, despite the fire of her spirit and the blood pumping through her legs. She could persevere, but whatever the mountain was or wanted, would be. What would be was a tall, rocky face with a jut that was far too tall and far too angular for her to do anything but stop. The seconds-long pause was all the wolves needed to surround her.
I'd said there was enough to fence me in,
she grit between chattering teeth.
But that didn't mean I wanted them to.
The wolves crept closer in a slow, knowing manner, well aware as she that there was no path to freedom. The girl dismissed the sight to deliver a questioning gaze at the cylindrical trinket around her neck. To her, this trinket was more than a simple accessory. It was a tried-and-true companion.
What to do?
She mused for precious seconds.
Nah, too much of a gamble.
The bowgun in this moment, useless. The wait for death through sunken fangs. Inevitable. The mastermind who formulated this chase had won. More so they would have, had Adios not smiled down upon her. As though to reward the girl's fortitude, a crisp gunshot rang out in that moment, sending a flurry of falling flakes scrambling. 2 wolves collapsed to the ground in the seconds that followed, gouts of blood staining the pure white around them. Startled, the wolves shifted their focus rapidly from their prey to their fallen comrades. Then again to source the direction of the sound. The first to find it seemed to fall with the thundering clap of a second shot.
Run! Now!
Cried a young man's voice through the howling wind. No doubt, the gunman. Indeed, the lupine blockade that had seemed so insurmountable was now weakened enough that her own weapon could finish the job. She gave a small nod to her unseen savior before rushing into the rest of the pack, firing bolts between the sound of more shots from afar. The swirling storm carried with it the scent of explosives, indicating to the girl that the gunman's weapon was no modern orbital gun, but an old-fashioned muzzle loader. Which bid the question, how were the intervals between firing and reloading so unnaturally short?
There's a path over here.
After confirming she had made her escape, the gunman slipped his upper half out from the shadows of a nearby crag and gestured for her to follow. Having traveled across many lands and encountered all manner of people, she knew from a glance that he was the single most reliable defender she could have chanced to meet under the circumstances. He cut a fine figure, with silvery hair that melted into the snowy mountaintop. His face seemed near chiseled from marble with its sharp lines, accompanied by a hunter's eye that pierced as well as any one of her bolts. Even the muscles that covered his tall frame were lithe and sculpted through practical training. He was, as she saw him, the fresh beauty of the mountain and its crystalline storm in human form. Peeking through a heavy fur coat was the muzzleloader she heard, confirmed to be just the one, despite its rapid fire. Stranger than this mystery, however, was how familiar he felt to her, even when they had never met before. She followed him into his rocky shelter, but perhaps the motion-perfect high from running to survive had already left her. The moment she felt safer, the book at her waist slipped clumsily from its pouch. Her hands weren't free to catch it, with one hand still clutching the bowgun and the other the trinket. The wintry-haired young man instead used the stock in hand for reloading his weapon to shift the book's course, pushing it to land on his own bags and saving its pages from being dampened by the snow.
Thanks. Guess you saved me and my book.
You're welcome, but only for the book. The jury's still out on if I've saved you. As he said it, their attention turned toward the wolves. They had done more than recover from the surprise attack. A fellow pack had joined them, swelling their numbers a great deal. He took a closer look at the new situation through the scope of his rifle, a slight twitch born from his narrowing eyes as he focused. He then pointed to a small animal trail to his left and waited for the girl to nod in understanding before entering it. She was dubious of their chances against a larger pack. So was he, she suspected. Certainly running down a route so familiar to their pursuers wouldn't get them out of their current predicament.
I might have to stack the odds a little more in our favor.
Taking the cylindrical trinket with both hands, she ran in the opposite direction from the young man, toward the wolves.
What are you doing? We've got to get...
The young man's shout was drowned out by a sudden light shining through her fingers from the trinket's engravings. What followed was a fog thick enough that even the most perceptive of wolves could see no farther than their own snout. As the fog continued to thicken, the snowstorm assailing the animal trail calmed to a gentle flutter. Then, to nothing.
Time to go then,
was all the girl said in response to this.
This way, right?
Yeah. We head through here and take a right. He had never witnessed anything like this in his countless years on the mountain. He didn't know what to think of it. She noticed.
Something the matter?
I just, wasn't expecting the fog to roll in.
Someone up there must really love us, huh?
The young man guided her down the trail under snowless skies, till they reached a flat housing scant trees. Beyond it were more powder-topped mountains and steep cliffs. The threat was no more.
It's hard to believe we lost them so quickly,
he muttered, suspicion evident in his tone.
It's amazing how fast you can go when you can see.
She dismissed his misgivings, instead looking him over while considering his clothing, skill, and where they had met. All 3 points had brought her to a clear conclusion.
Thank you for your help,
she began.
But there's something I'd like to ask, if you don't mind.
I suppose I don't mind. His hesitance was the only thing that shook her certainty, but only for a brief moment. He must have been a little different from the others she knew of, for the rest of his traits were unmistakable.
Are you a Matagi?
His eyes widened in surprise for a beat, then another. Then, silently, he nodded. To be continued. Chapter 2. Mountain Hunters. In the northeastern part of the Zemurian continent, where the impact of desertification was relatively minor, settled a culture considered unique even by the standards of the widely diverse region. They worshipped Mount Whitecrown, a place known to have fostered countless ecosystems despite its harsh environment. And through living in harmony with this mountain, they gave birth to technologies and philosophies found nowhere else in the world. The Matagi were hunters of legend, known in song to have slain even the likes of dragons. Yet though once quite known far and wide, and though revered for their dedication to their art through their descendants, they were slowly becoming one of among many forgotten cultures scattered along the eastern edge of the continent. While their ways were still handed down even in modern times, the Matagi's village was nearly empty, its population comprising mostly of the elderly. The youth had left the mountain to use their traditional methods in more lucrative areas, like through the Bracer Guild or as mercenaries for hire. Their legacy was fading with the times. As of now, however, 2 relics to represent it were still featured prominently in the village square. One was a wooden carving of the mountain spirit worshipped at their yearly festival. The second, added in more recent years, was a stone monument engraved with the name and family crest of a legendary hunter, Kiyun Olkis. The time was just past noon. On this day, a young man was standing with these relics. He stood out further still, for beyond his age and fine features, his hair carried a silvery tint to it, rather than a Matagi's traditionally fair white. His hunting equipment lay at his feet. Leaning back against the earthen foundation that held these carvings, he stared up, not at them, but past them to the cloudy sky, warming his body with sips from a gourd of amakaze.
Already done hunting for the day, Chunlan? Can't think of another soul who could keep up with you.
An elder who had only aged with greater vigor and dignity as the years went on called out to him. He was the chieftain, and he acted as both elder of the village and director of its group hunts. Afternoon. Quotas met and income for the village is stable, Chunlan replied, hanging the now emptied gourd at his waist as he did so. Those Calvardian merchants will take just about anything we sell. Chunlan Eisen was the last of the villagers who could still be considered a youth, in the eyes of the chieftain, whose role was to see their continued existence. This made him more valuable than the high-quality prey they often sold to supplement their needs.
Now that's some fine work. Fine work indeed. I'm sure your father would be very pleased.
Flattery isn't going to get you anywhere here. Afraid my answer's not going to change. Knowing well the conversation that was poised to follow, Chunlan reached down to sling his equipment over his back and turned his gaze toward up the mountain, toward home.
Oh, but I assure you, I meant nothing by it. I'm simply grateful we have such a young, strong...
Sure hope I'm strong.
Wouldn't doubt it for a moment.
Couldn't possibly be otherwise with that kind of confidence in me. Chunlan maintained a cool indifference throughout. To most, the sight of a village elder scrambling to avoid displeasing a fellow so much younger would be quite the spectacle. But the chieftain had his own reasons to persist in this behavior. He had no desire to be chieftain. In fact, he never desired the position from day one. There were many others who were more qualified than he, but one by one, these potentials left the Matagi's village for greater prospects. After a time, there was only him, and while he fulfilled what he could of his post, his mind was often occupied with finding someone suitable enough to relieve him of it. Chunlan was aware of this. How could he not be, with such an unabashed display, making him twice as reluctant to accept anything said.
Are you still worried about what your father said? Best not to let it trouble you. Why not instead take a look at the people around you?
Though the young man had no intention of doing anything simply because he was asked, Chunlan, perhaps guided by the blood running through his veins, did so. He saw pelts drying in the sun. He saw elders maintaining their weapons, backs strong. He saw two men, jovial from alcohol, sharing heroic exploits while flaunting old wounds. All things he was familiar with. All things he should have been used to.
These people recognize your strength, but still, you come here every day and...
I'll keep it in mind. Excuse me. Chunlan made for the village entrance before any further discussions could be made, being very conscious of the fact that he was running away. But this was all he could do. Before he could tell the chieftain what his plans for the future were, he would have to discover them for himself. His residence was a wood-framed cabin of Western design that overlooked the Matagi's village. Though a bit of a walk from the rest of its residents, he never once entertained the thought of leaving the home his parents left behind. There was discovery to be found in these solitary walks. Things like the signs of spring's return after a long, harsh winter, or the subtle traces of exotic game having passed through. Chance encounters, new discoveries, and the like were abound throughout this simple trail, if one were to look closely, his father taught him, and these were never without value. Today's encounter required no cunning to notice. Any Matagi would have sensed the presence of so many animals, their number being far higher than what was usual for the area. There had to be a reason for it. Chunlan loosely placed his hands around his rifle, known as a surube among the Matagi, a modified old-fashioned model from the Calvard Republic. He wasn't quite certain what to make of this anomaly yet, but he would nevertheless have to investigate further and report his findings to the chieftain. When he found its source, He realized he needed more than a loose grip out of caution. He needed to be ready to fire. The presence of wolves so great a size was already a shocking sight on Mount Whitecrown. Never mind the number. Rarer still was the person they were chasing, a girl whose clothing marked her as one of a foreign land. The lessons of his past echoed in his mind as he shifted silently into the shadows of a stone crag.
Listen, Chanlan. The Matagi aren't solely hunters. We are protectors of this mountain, its bounties being blessings from Adios.
His finger was on the trigger. The rest he muttered to himself aloud.
We must keep it free from impurities.
He squeezed, and upon a fiery burst at the head of the muzzle, hot lead shot through the air, evaporating the snow it passed through in an instant. Just as he intended, the bullet appeared as though it were sucked into the torso of a first wolf before exiting through and downing a second. Chaos rippled through the pack, but the young man knew this was not certain victory. Wild animals were driven by survival instincts above all else, and any break in their formation would be mended faster than most humans could react.
Run! Now!
He fired a second shot. The girl reacted by turning in his direction till their eyes met. Through snow-tossed winds, he could still see the intelligence in her gaze. More than that, even, to an unexpected degree. She was foreign. How could he not see confusion under these circumstances? Fear for her life? Anxiety over her surroundings? Whatever was happening in this mountain, she had complete clarity on what it was. Junlan's first true interaction with the girl came after she entered the crag where he awaited her, where he saved a book that had slipped from her possession from falling into the snow.
She made it,
he thought to himself. He had indicated a path of escape for her to follow, which she did with excellent haste.
She must be some girl to have held out against those beasts.
The sunlight was dyed with a hint of red as it looked down upon Mount Whitecrown, where a large pack of wolves were racing along a high road. Several other packs, all being driven in the same direction, collapsed into this larger one until they had melded into a massive swarm. A few selch behind them stood the one responsible for stirring them so, leaving them with no way to go but frantically forward. Scattered all around him were the corpses of boars, bears, and fellow wolves.
And here I have myself another mountain whose beasts of revered repute have failed me,
the man muttered with boredom born from tedium, eyes scanning the cold carcasses arrayed at his feet. The man's solid frame wrapped in red and his hair, black and shaved thoroughly with unique patterns, would be enough to catch anyone's attention, but it was his skin that dwarfed these otherwise uncommon features. His face, neck, hands, palms, nearly every visible part of him, save for his ears, was tattooed in arcane symbols that unsettled the mind. So thoroughly covered was he that, certainly, it would not be a stretch to think that if his clothes were stripped and head shaved bare, he would still be covered.
Why crown, eh? And who thought to crown you?
His lips curled into a sneer as he looked toward the mountain's peak.
With no more game to hunt, you're as good as... What have we here?
Something caught his attention. He watched this something through the snow with great intrigue, sneer twisting into a smile of twisted delight.
So you were hiding the fun elsewhere. Seems there's still hope for you yet, Mountain.
With a single effortless thrust, he pierced through a lone wolf that dared to resist him, his stone-tipped spear digging into the ground and forever pinning it to the earth. He then turned to walk with eager footsteps. As he moved, a gentle red glow alighted across him through his tattoos, and the grin on his face mangled itself into a level of malice and thirst no human should ever be capable of. To be continued. Chapter 3. Of Hunters and Wanderers. Are you a Matagi? Chunlan had been struck with an unease that what was happening on Mount Whitecrown was only the start of something bigger, which was also why the simple question struck him so. He wasn't sure how she, a clear foreign girl from somewhere very distant, had immediately recognized him as a Matagi, when even the local lands had long forgotten how to make the distinction. His features held no particular tells, nor did his clothes. Not even his sharpshooting was anything, he felt, different enough to reveal he was of a fading people. There was another reason he hesitated. Did he have the right to call himself a Matagi? The girl tilted her head with curiosity as she waited for Chunlan's answer. Knowing this to be no time for ambiguity, he nodded.
I knew it.
She appeared to mean that. For the first time since their ordeal, she expressed a small, warm smile.
How'd you know? I met one of you a long time ago. A vagabond.
This too struck Chunlan. Some Matagi were vagabonds back during their golden age, but now, most remained close to the village. So few among them traveled that he was certain he would have known who she was talking about right away, were it true. Of course, it could have been one acting as a hired gun or Jaeger, while still touting their heritage to make a name for themselves. He couldn't know, however, so he decided to dismiss the topic in favor of their situation at hand. What was happening on this mountain? The wolves weren't the only oddity, surely. He could sense it, leaving his body hair tense and ready to go into fight or flight.
Well, we've put some distance between us and the wolves. I'd say we gave them the slip, but...
Chunlan intended to invite the girl to the village, but she had already started walking.
Hold on a minute, you should... Thanks for the help, but now that I've used this, I need to hurry, and I wouldn't have just been around here for fun. I'm meeting someone.
The girl clasped the cylindrical trinket hanging from her neck, tempting Chunlan's eyes to observe it closely. He traced the strange symbols etched all along the thing, it being a bit larger than a flute, and it brought to mind the sudden fog that had helped them escape the wolves.
I know this is a strange question, but did you have anything to do with that fog? How about we start with whether you're coming or going? I sure wouldn't mind having a Matagi with me, so I won't say no if you are.
She asked, due to him naturally following her without him realizing it. This had less to do with curiosity on his part, and more to do with the need to see she was safe. An instinctive habit that was less helpful and more patronizing and unnecessary.
We'll see,
he responded, though he continued to accompany her. There was something about this girl. The way her calm demeanor felt more tightened than relaxed. That led him to believe she felt backed into some kind of corner. Was this because of what happened so far? Or what could stand to happen in the future? Mount Whitecrown responded with silence to his inner musings.
How much should I tell you?
Croaked the girl as she looked down at the cylindrical trinket. It was more a statement than a genuine question. It was strange for her lips to remain tight, Chunlan thought, after he had already witnessed her gamble in the flesh, but there was no forcing it out of her if she wanted to remain silent as the mountain.
How about we start with who you are? I'm Chunlan Eisen. Chunlan is fine. I'm Matagi, like you said.
His gaze dropped from her to the muzzleloader in his hands.
Well, I'm Sayu,
she responded. Unlike Chunlan, her gaze remained fixed on him, her voice never lacking in confidence.
As for who I am, I'm a Woodland wanderer.
What is that? The name of your people? I've never heard of them before, but then maybe they aren't local. He already knew she was a foreigner, but this absolutely confirmed that she was from somewhere far, far away.
We're not really from anywhere. Every day we wander the woods and hills. You could say the journey itself is our home.
Ah, so you're a nomadic people then. Where are the rest of you?
Something came up, and I had to go solo for a bit.
She stopped.
That person I'm meeting is actually one of us. His fuse is short, and he's a little too overprotective for his own good, so I'm not exactly jumping for joy over it.
Sayu then turned to look at Chunlan, awaiting his definitive response. Though she hadn't said it out loud, he knew that this was the point of going one way or the other for him. Did he want to make certain she was well and get more answers? Or did he want to turn back and deem this a passing meeting between odd strangers? Chunlan also slowed to a meek stop. What use could he be to her, really? He couldn't even say he was a Matagi out loud. Would someone so indecisive really prove to be of worth in whatever lay up ahead? She was in a hurry, Sayu had said, but she still waited patiently for her new companion to wrestle with his thoughts. Against his doubts, the desire to ensure her safety was slowly winning out, as it so often did, but the silence stretched as he failed to put anything into words. As this went on, there was a subtle shift in the wind coursing through them. the sign of a snowstorm on the horizon. I think, Chunlan began before stopping himself short. Both he and Sayu felt the oncoming storm, only to also realize it was no simple storm. It was a beast. The echoing, deafening roar they heard next made it clear something supernatural was drawing near, causing Chunlan to draw in a sharp breath in surprise. He had felt this presence before. There was no way he could ever forget it, no way he could mistake that ferocity. It had been years since he saw the beast, but the very weight of its existence was enough to be carried by the wind. Sayu's response was not one of surprise, but of action. She looked down at her cylindrical trinket, which seemed to pulsate with light as the beast's roar reached their ears.
It's resonating. I was right about this mountain.
There was no need to answer out loud now. They both knew, in that moment, that they were after the same thing. After sharing an understanding glance, they took off running up a nearby hill, heading straight toward the invisible storm. The closer they edged into their target, the brighter Sayu's trinket glowed.
First the weird fog, and now this?
Chunlan thought toward the ever-growing light.
Just what is that thing, and why is it reacting to the beast?
Rather, why did an object from a foreign land react to a local beast from his own past? His thoughts continued.
I never thought I'd meet it again like this. I suppose Adios must have a plan in mind.
After a few moments of a dead sprint, it appeared before them, dominating their field of view. Despite the tens of arches separating them, they could both feel the overwhelming, wild force of its presence. It stood with the peak of Mount Whitecrown behind it, overlooking its surroundings, its form the very image of a king surveying his domain. It was a giant bear, easily dwarfing any other Most had ever seen, surrounded by a cloak of lightning. Every few moments, firework-like bursts of electricity would crackle off its blue-white fur to display the immense power pressurized within that was eager to surge without. The light given off by its flashes of power surrounded it like a halo, providing a contrast that emphasized every muscle, every sinew of its frame.
I knew it was you,
Chunlan growled. This was the one, the beast that, 5 years ago, had changed the entire course of his life.
Raiju.
To be continued. Chapter 4. Dual Threats. Fate can be strange, fate can be fickle, and, at times, fate can be irredeemably cruel. Guided by the girl, Chunlan found himself face to face with a living symbol of the laws of his people, the laws he loathed, but would be pained to lose. There was not a single person living on Mount Whitecrown who had not heard of Raiju. Since its first appearance 10 years prior, it had used its lightning to slaughter countless humans and animals, usurping the balance of power all throughout nature. Many Matagi rose to challenge it, and were injured or fallen, with none so much as finding its lair. It now lived as a symbol of destruction and greed, known to all as a true blight upon the land. And now, here it was. Upon sight of this bear before him, the instincts he long sealed away were prickling through to the surface. It was an excitement that coursed through muscle, through flesh, through bone, the craving for a rematch and, as he noticed with the trembling of his fingers over his rifle, also a deep fear.
Its name is Raiju?
Sayu looked to Chunlan, puzzled over the name, but the more the cylindrical trinket glowed bright, the more her eyes shifted nervously. Up till then, he had only seen her act cool and calm. Now her eyes darted back and forth with a mild panic between him, the trinket, and the bear.
That's right. Don't tell me you came here looking for it. No, I knew there was a part of it here, but I didn't know it'd manifest as a beast like this.
A part? Something to do with the cylinder. The thing continued to light up in response to Raiju, shining brighter and brighter the closer it approached. Chunlan couldn't quite wrap his mind around it. A part would indicate that once united, the beast and the trinket would become whole. But what kind of relationship could there be between a monstrous creature of nature and a man-made instrument?
Just what is that
Raiju roared. Chunlan, a flicker of exhilaration being elicited by the sound, cut himself off and turned his focus back on the beast.
You're just itching for a fight, aren't you?
It responded with a mighty leap from the rock it stood upon, diving toward them. Sparks erupted from its body with each print impressed into the ground.
No, you're not the one it's calling out to.
Before Sayu could explain, a spear of stone as tall as either of them darted from somewhere, whistling eerily through the air as it arced straight for Raiju. The beast stepped aside to miss the attack in an instant, but the spear held such thrust behind it that even the slight brush upon its side tore a hunk of hide from its flesh. A crimson stain began bubbling through its blue-white fur. The King of Thunder halted its advance, looking somewhere off in the distance before stepping backward with timorous hesitation. Then, with a flash of light to cover its movements, it retreated back into the mountain.
Damn you! I am not missing this chance! Get back here!
Chunlan cried, though he knew well it had made the wisest choice to save its own life. Even still, having his unexpected rematch stolen away by an equally unexpected external force left him with a bitter taste in his mouth.
Chunlan, look out!
Whatever threat had chased Raiju off wasted no time in turning its attention toward them. Ducking the instant he heard Sayu's warning, Chunlan watched the stone spear streak just over his head, hitting a splintering tree that was growing right in front of him.
What was that? I've never seen an art like that!
He's coming, Sayu muttered in response.
He who?
The two made their own retreat behind some nearby rocks. Sayu gripped the trinket around her neck, now weakened in its glow, tighter than ever as she explained. While he listened, Chunlan used a pair of binoculars on his person to scan where the spears had flown from in hopes of seeing who or what was behind them.
He attacks Woodland Wanderers and steals the artifacts we collect,
she started.
And I assure you, we won't be the first he's murdered. He's a berserker who spreads destruction wherever he goes.
The binoculars revealed an unusual figure. He was tattooed with symbols on every surface of his skin but his ears. Even his hair had similar patterns shaved into it. And as he stood, the playful smile on his lips betrayed no hints of the violent nature she was describing.
No, that undersells him. He's trying to murder every last one of us, and we don't even know who or what he is. All we have is the name we made up for him.
Though far away, Chunlan was met with the man's direct gaze, one 10 times sharper, 10 times heavier than his own. Even through the lens, he felt a bloodthirsty aura that pierced through him as well as any stone spear that could be thrown. It was terrifying. And, as he absorbed this fear, the man disappeared from view.
We call him the Oni, the demon.
Chunlan put the binoculars down, seeing that the Oni now only stood a few dozen arch from their position.
So the bear got away. No matter. There are times when business is better fit before pleasure.
As if on cue from his words, the rocks around the two exploded. When he saw no blood-trailed remains among the rubble, however, he merely smiled in appreciation of their abilities. The gunshot that rang out immediately after did nothing to change this.
You found yourself an intriguing bodyguard, little mouse.
The shot aimed toward the Oni failed to ruffle him in the least. Fear nor hesitation traced his features, but rather a conflict between calmness toward the circumstances and a desirous hunger for violence. A rock wall effortlessly burst from the ground to block the bullet before it could reach him.
I'm not interested in your weird tricks, Oni! We want to know who you are! And why are you here?
Chunlan and Sayu managed to only just evade the rocks exploding. Now Chunlan, hidden in a bank of withered weeds, kept his finger on the trigger as he barreled their pursuer with questions. The ease at which the man had blocked his shot left him shaken, but he recovered control and put on a brave front so as to not further shift the muzzle of his rifle with anxious trembling. The more ferocious the opponent, the less you showed of them your back. That was one of the iron laws of the Matagi.
I am the Stone Melder. I'd much prefer you call me that over that other unfortunate name you've given me.
And why are you coming after Sayu? Why did you try to kill Raiju?
He continued to fire off questions with the speed at which he reloaded, and fired more bullets from his rifle, slowly adjusting himself to a position that would allow him to move instantaneously, should he need to.
I'm here to squeeze the life out of a little mouse and her whole mouse clan, if that isn't apparent enough. Their death shall be an offering to another clan, and to see this mission of mine accomplished, I've been gifted power. My stone melding exists for no greater reason than what I speak.
Lies. Some of it, at least. Chunlan could sense it as soon as the Oni opened his mouth, for it was in no way possible for the joy that split the man's face as he attacked Raiju to be under the guise of a mere mission. Yet, he wondered if the Oni himself was unaware of how naked his desire for killing was through his deceptive answer. Still, there had to be a reason behind it. A real reason.
That's all?
Chunlan responded.
Well, none of that sounds like a good enough reason to be on my mountain. So get off!
Even as he said it, Chunlan pressed down and let the next bullet fly, leaping straight toward the Oni. He slammed his right fist into the ground in response, and more masses of stone lifted from the earth to form a wall that shielded him. Perfect. Coaxing the Oni into creating this wall had been part of Chunlan's plan. Moving to hide in the shadow of the wall, Chunlan used the moment to grip his Nagasa, a special hunting knife of the Matagi, to slide into the man's blind spot and strike.
Ha! It'll take more than that, little cub.
Even as the light flashed off Chunlan's arcing blade, he felt a sharp stab of pain through his body, leaving his consciousness to swim through naught but blackened agony. It wasn't until his back slammed into the ground just behind where he had been that he saw the Oni's left hand was encased entirely in rock to form a heavy gauntlet.
Your blade found its mark. It's been a while since I was last scratched.
The rock wall crumbled, revealing the Oni's twisted expression. He panted with excitement as warm lifeblood dripped liberally from the wound on his side.
A parlor trick at best, but I like your spark. You will make a fine warm-up before I take down that bear.
We Matagi do love our parlor tricks,
Chunlan replied dryly.
Sometimes we even like to use ourselves as decoys.
As the Oni moved to close the distance between him and Chunlan, several bolts came raining down from above. He blocked them with the stone still wrapped in his hand, but by the time he returned his eyes to his opponent, he was gone.
He blocked that too, huh? Too bad. But thanks anyway, Sayu. I should be the one thanking you. Now I've got proof his stone walls aren't a perfect defense. That alone is worth its weight in money to me.
After firing off another bolt to force more distance between them and the Oni, Sayu helped Chunlan to his feet, and the two slipped into the thick foliage nearby. Chunlan could see the foreign girl was back in control of her emotions. That was the only way she could have known to step in to strike, without him saying a word.
Looks like one of my most reliable relatives got to see the guy's weakness, too.
As she said this, she pointed up to a cliff in the direction they were heading. There, Chunlan got his first look at the one Sayu intended to meet on the mountain. To be continued. Chapter 5. Sayu's Fight. Chunlan followed Sayu's pointed finger toward a cliff that towered behind the Oni to see a man.
Special delivery, Sayu! Your BFF has arrived! There's that annoying as crap voice.
As the Oni's attention turned to the source of this new voice echoing through the mountain, the young man leaped from his place, the sun eclipsing his body with stark shadows that made it impossible to see his face. Chunlan could see he was taller and leaner than he, and dressed in all furs, the hooded part further covering its wearer's face. But that was all he could surmise of him. Well, Chunlan supposed he could surmise one other thing. He knew how to fight. The Oni snarled as he formed a disc-shaped buckler of stone to fend off the oncoming dropkick.
Another damned mouse has come to nibble at my toes. Come all you like. The number makes no difference to me.
The young man, however, simply used this shield as a stepping stone to spring himself into the air a second time.
Your back's wide open, scribble face!
First twisting into the air, he then landed behind the Oni and launched a flurry of punches at the towering sun-reddened back before him. The speed of these attacks made it feel as though his fists had multiplied to deliver a veritable storm of strikes.
A fine effort, but it's nowhere near enough.
The onslaught pushed the Oni back to a stagger at most. He immediately straightened and kicked off the ground, soaring away and summoning a rock wall to cover his retreat. The young man halted in turn, jumping backward to put yet more distance between them.
You just had to make a dramatic entrance, didn't you, Dao?
Sayu chided with a smirk.
No way! Complete coincidence that I showed up just in the nick of time!
Dao answered while dodging a counterattack from the Oni, showing them an unperturbed smile as he did so. He then added,
I will say, though, I'm glad I showed up when I did. Got to see something very interesting.
Chunlan had no trouble guessing to what he was referring. It was the idea of using their villain's rock walls to stab him in his blind spots, just as he had done with his Nagasa. As Sayu put it, these earthen walls were not the perfect defense they were made out to be on the surface. But Dao had also noticed something else.
And I don't just mean the blind spots you were exploiting. I mean that those walls don't just come out instinctively when he needs them. Yeah, if we take advantage of that, he's as good as done,
exclaimed Sayu. She then whistled, turning her relative's attention toward her as she made some sort of shorthand signal. The young man's hood bent forward as he nodded in turn, and then immediately he began launching sporadically timed attacks to demand the Oni's attention.
It's almost like you two share one mind, Chunlan observed. Guess he was worth meeting up with after all. Tell me about it,
she agreed.
Okay, Chunlan, let's move out.
Sayu guided Chunlan to a nearby hill that overlooked a snow-covered slope. Atop this was a giant lump of ice balanced uncertainly, with an avalanche's worth of snow built up behind it, as the frozen shape snatched the moisture from the air surrounding it. Dao intended to slowly lead Oni right to this very slope. Chunlan questioned this plan with a raised eyebrow.
I get the plan, but he's not stupid enough to fall for such an obvious trap, is he?
She returned the question with a cheeky smile and held up the cylindrical trinket to his face to answer his question.
No sense in me hiding what it can do to you now. I'm going to get things ready. You just wait for my signal. You'll know exactly where to shoot.
I'm sure I will. Chunlan looked through his binoculars at the point Sayu implied, then put them down and muttered to himself what an abomination this was as a man of the mountain while fixing the scope of his muzzleloader. At the same time, Dao continued drawing the Oni into their desired point in a merry chase consisting of attacking and retreating again.
I admire the way you so desperately cling to life, mouse,
the Oni growled, swinging his stony fist with a winning man's wild energy. It appeared he hadn't noticed his prey was intentionally leading him elsewhere.
But I grow tired of playing with you. Oblivion will suit you well. Now come here.
Impatience building, he wrapped a massive wealth of stone around his hand and let loose a single punch filled with a murderous intent unlike any of the previous. A direct hit from such a blow would have been more than any human body could bear. Yet, in the next instant, the Oni's tattooed face twisted with perplexity. His tightened fist was not, as he expected, wrapped by a corpse, but rather swathed in the fur the young man had been wearing.
We call that molting, see? I got some tricks up my sleeve, too!
Having shed his fur garment, Dao flipped through the air, a provoking smirk on his now revealed face. A handsome one, with close-cropped dark blue hair. Well-kempt though he certainly was, there was no doubting the wild air that accompanied it. His every gesture was lithe, feral, and free.
Continue this game with your scampering all you like,
the Oni snarled.
By the end of it, you'll be smeared across this mountain.
He aimed his next strike toward the ground. Controlling the fragments of stone that rose from it, he slung them toward Dao, bathing the young man in a merciless storm of shrapnel. Dao continued to move backward, despite being pelted from head to toe, his movements keeping the damage done to a minimum as he maintained a safe distance between himself and his oncoming foe. The gap was, in fact, one of the signals to his two allies that the Oni had arrived at the right spot for a full-on assault. Now fully engrossed by the shift in Dao's tactics, the Oni had no time to wonder about the 3 bolts from a crossbow that flew over his head in the moment.
Chunlan!
Ready! Chunlan replied to Sayu. His weapon's scope was fixed on a small chunk of ice with a frozen stalactite hanging from its belly. Mere seconds later, fire spat from Chunlan's muzzleloader, the bullet biting into this most vulnerable chunk. The point destroyed, the weight it supported was now too much to bear, forcing a massive mound of ice to begin collapsing inward on itself, as it threatened to hurtle down the slope. As if to follow the lead of the crumbling ice, a range of snow covering the face of the slope followed. No simple landslide would have been a threat to the Oni and his wealth of experience, but this mighty force would be like a beast the size of the mountain itself shedding its wintry coat. Chunlan could see light dancing through the fog at places along the incline, the 3 exact locations where Sayu had shot her bolts. The slope began to tremble with greater force. The moment the light and fog given off by the bolts faded, the earth truly awakened with a terrifying moan. The ice and snow at the top of the slope now fully collapsed, then rumbled down the mountain with a speed in which nothing could escape.
Ha!
The Oni cried with amusement.
An interesting gambit, but you'll...
The monster of a man had no time for retorts, yet he realized this too late. Before he could finish his sentence, the avalanche had rushed downward to swallow his legs, the buildup around him increasing at far too great a speed for him to summon a new wall of stone to protect him. Cold, wholly violent waves continued to crash into him, engulfing his form until even his vibrant tattoos were buried beneath the silvery white drifts. By the end of it, he had been completely entombed beneath ice and snow.
Did we get him?
Chunlan called out. Sayu shook her head.
I doubt that'll kill a guy like him, but I don't think he'll be getting out anytime soon.
Great, too immortal even for an avalanche. But just how did you manage to pull off one of that size? He was still in awe of what they had just accomplished with a few bolts and a bullet, but the cause versus the effect was still on a seemingly inconceivable scale.
I adjusted the moisture along the slope and made conditions ideal for the snow to slide,
answered Sayu as she removed the trinket from a custom slot in her crossbow, returning it to around her neck. Each bolt sent had been infused with a kind of energy from it before being fired, and Chunlan now realized they retained this connective energy even after being fired off a good distance away.
So that little cylinder was the key, huh?
Figures, Chunlan muttered. The Oni was after it too, but even still, I can't believe it has the power to adjust the moisture of the whole face. Chunlan's need for answers was now at its peak. If there was some kind of paranormal event behind it all, perhaps understanding it would help him learn more about the mysterious origins behind Raiju.
Atta girl, Sayu! Your plan got him in one! You're good though, right? Not hurt anywhere.
Dao hurried over to the two of them, rattling off the questions and commentary once close enough through a chomped leaf that stuck out of his mouth. His hair may have been a different color from his relatives, but their clothing had similar patterns, and their suntanned skin held the same natural shade. He, however, had opted to paint over his, in a way that very much stood out.
I'm fine. I was more worried about you, Dao. Just where were you?
Sorry about that, he replied with a humble smile.
I'd actually stopped by a village near here to gather some info first. Some luck though, huh? First some wolves were running wild, then the Oni showed up. But they should be behind us now. Still...
Dao took Sayu by the shoulders, enfolding her securely in his arms, as he fixed Chunlan with his gaze.
You a local? A hunter, maybe. Thanks for helping Sayu.
I should be the one saying thanks, Chunlan replied. You're... Dao, I think it was. You're Sayu's what, brother?
Close enough. We're technically cousins, but we may as well be brother and sister. And you might have heard of me. Tornado Dao. Ring a bell?
It sure doesn't, but it's a pleasure. Chunlan offered his hand, which Dao took. Dao's other hand was off the side with Sayu, preventing this stranger he had only just met from getting too close to her. Chunlan followed up. Well, I've got an awful lot of questions after all this, but we can save that for once we're not outside. The weather's only going to get worse tonight. He then looked up at the sky, watching as the wind carried clouds of snow. To him, it said the spirits of the mountain had seen the whole affair, and they were in a frightful rage for it. To be continued. Chapter 6. Thus spoke a woodland wanderer. Nestled in the northeastern corner of the Zemurian continent loomed Mount Whitecrown. Its body played mother to a richly unique culture and ecosystem. But though loved deeply by the people who made her their home, she was not merciful in turn. The many mysteries and phenomena she held, seen as events worthy of worship for some, while mere fables worthy of dismissal for others, made life very difficult indeed. But still, they continued to live on in her embrace, accepting that this was and would always be her way. There were those who insisted there was a connection between the stories of the mountain and the mysterious disappearance of the greatest Matagi who ever lived, Kiyun Olkis. It was on this day that Chunlan was about to come face to face with the truth behind this long-sung tale through a threat looming in the shadows, all while discovering something more about himself than he ever thought possible, and all through the words of someone who came from somewhere far away.
So that weird little thing is called the Cylinder of the Frozen Sky. I've never actually seen an artifact before.
As the sun set, Mount Whitecrown wailed as wind and snow kicked up to bid these new invaders unwelcome. They had to move quickly, which is why the three of them, Chunlan, Sayu, and Dao, now huddled around a campfire in a small cave, the blizzard raging on just arches away. Dao, who had lost his fur coat during their lively encounter, had taken to piling liberal amounts of wood into the fire. According to the two foreigners, the Cylinder of the Frozen Sky was capable of adjusting the concentration of moisture in the air, or even controlling the weather within a certain radius. That made quick work of the mystery of how she was able to create fog from seemingly nothing, or banish snowstorms with a flicker of light.
And it's also how you were able to cause an avalanche that huge?
Chunlan asked, though he knew the answer already.
Yeah, I concentrated its power into bolts and adjusted the moisture of the snow where the bolts landed. If you know how it works, it links up well enough with weapons. Oh, well enough. You make it sound like it's not something beyond belief. I almost still don't believe it.
Chunlan's surprise wasn't just at the artifact, but at the series of events that had occurred in unbelievable succession. The whole day had succeeded in astounding him utterly, from the nomadic tribe responsible for this artifact in hand, to the man who hunted them with an expression of malicious thrill. And how did this girl seem to know so much about the world? So much he didn't know. He had never experienced the things she seemed so indifferent to in all his years on the mountain, and with that in mind, he further wondered if these were the kinds of things his old friends who left the village were now experiencing on their journeys. Realizing how little he knew about the outside world startled him in one sense, but in another, it left him curious for more revelations. Dao gave a warm laugh as he wrapped his arms around her shoulders to pull her in, as he had done before.
Ain't she something else? Doesn't matter how bad a situation gets, she can always think up a way out. Dao, we've talked about this,
Sayu whined as she shrugged him off. Even this small interplay between the two that had no doubt happened countless times before felt like something that had come from another world entirely. Their every word, their every interaction, served to overwhelm Chunlan, making him realize just how small his existence truly was, dwarfing his spirit more than even the mountain that rose high above them. But his loyalty to the mountain remained, even in this bizarre, enlightening befuddlement. He was a Matagi, and through that, the weight of the situation was twice so, inspiring him to rise to action and stop the incoming threat from encroaching upon his small world further.
It's still hard to wrap my head around it all. But are you planning to get that part you mentioned back from Raiju?
Chunlan pushed the discussion forward, not just to cover the erupting conflict within, but to provide himself some direction. He needed to know precisely where to go in order to discover the role he would have to play in the reality unfolding before him.
Yeah,
confirmed Sayu.
It needs to be complete so we can offer it at the shrine. And once it's complete, it should give us the power we need to take down the Oni for good.
She went on to say that they had known the part needed was on Mount Whitecrown, but until she saw it, she was unaware that it had fused with indigenous life. Yet, that changed nothing, for they had to retrieve it, fused or free. This new direction failed to anchor him as he hoped. He met a fated, beastly rival he hadn't seen in years, only due to the influence of outsiders, who revealed to him what gave the beast its legendary status. It was nothing he could have possibly predicted. It came with the strange sensation, one he wouldn't quite be able to put into words, if prompted, that his past had run off without him, morphing and distorting under the watchful eyes of others till it was no longer a narrative to call his own, even if he had to be the one to confront it in the present, He continued on. It was all he could do.
Right. That Oni is an entirely different problem.
With Raiju, at least there was a tangible connection, distorted it was now, that cemented these implausible circumstances in reality. The Oni, though, made him feel as though he had been thrust right back into the realm of fantasy. They could not afford to let that monster of a man remain the dominant party between them. Taking up his rifle, Chunlan wordlessly stepped away from the fire, turning toward the entrance of which there was only a swirling vortex of night sky and icy snow.
Where are you headed off to all of a sudden?
Dao stood up and reached out to Chunlan, gripping his shoulder to stop him in his tracks.
I can't let the Oni kill Raiju. So, I need to hunt it down before he rises from the snow. It would be a disaster if he snatched that part before we could get it.
When he turned to answer them, he was met with two unexpected expressions. Expressions one normally wouldn't present in the face of someone readying themselves for a fight to the death. They were smiling. Unexpected though they were, he found comfort in that being their natural reaction. Dao answered,
Well, then we're all in the same boat. Wouldn't hurt to bring along someone like me if you're open to having a partner help you race the Oni to the finish line. I tell you, I got a mean kick.
And since Raiju has a part of the artifact inside it, we should both know our way around it.
Sayu added.
I doubt either of us would slow you down.
Both of them were right. There was no good reason for Chunlan to be so possessive over this hunt, and there was no greater recipe for seeing to its success than cooperating with two who may know the beast better than he ever thought he did.
I don't doubt that, Chunlan responded, but the King of Thunder and I have a history.
Why was he being so stubborn about this? Group hunts were a Matagi tradition, so they were more than familiar to him, but here he was, impatiently eager to rush ahead on his own. A part of him was embarrassed by his confusion, when their reactions were among the few things in this moment rooted in coherence.
Why do you want to go alone?
Sayu asked.
How come nothing seems to shake you?
Chunlan responded with a question of his own. Again, he hoped their answer would anchor him in some way, push him in a right, sound direction that would help him feel with the ease they did. Sayu answered without hesitation.
Because my goal has an end with meaning, not just to our people as a whole, but to me as a person. So all that's left to do is achieve it.
Makes sense.
It didn't. He didn't know anything about what truly drove her, or what gave this mission of hers such meaning that it drowned out all hesitation. But he could at least, however invisible, however intangible it was, feel a foundational strength in her answer that brought him comfort. Dao sought to comfort him in another way.
Don't think too hard about it. Sayu's an unusual one. Even I have trouble understanding her sometimes. For now, let's just boil it down to us wanting to have your back in a fight. That good enough?
Between the talk, Dao had retrieved some things to prepare for heading back out before returning to Chunlan's side to clap him encouragingly on the shoulder.
Yeah. Good enough for now.
At the time, Chunlan was still aware that the very thing causing his heart to hesitate was also calling up a memory buried deep within. To be continued. Chapter 7. One People, One Purpose. Sayu could barely see Chunlan's back in front of her. The snow clouds above were thick enough to obscure the moon, and the wind blew hard enough to drive fragments of icy snow into even the tiniest gaps of their clothing. The drifts piling up on the ground were now up to their knees, sapping their strength with every step. Februaries on Mount Whitecrown meant that blizzards struck with the ferocity of a temple guard, repealing any who dared to trespass on their sanctuary, and the years had only made them more violent. The Matagi took this as a sign that the mountain spirits were angry at humanity for desecrating the blessings bestowed upon them by Adios. It would be easy to dismiss this as superstition, but the way in which the mountain swallowed up its prey in snow bordered on unnatural. Even the sound of each blizzard's fury was enough to drown out the most primal of screams for help, making rescue a fool's dream. In Mount Whitecrown's most recent display of rage, a single point of light marched through. It consisted of 3 travelers, speaking volumes at their peak to only just hear one another.
Damn, it's cold out here. Sure was an idiot for losing my furs. Achoo!
Want to trade coats, Dao?
Don't be silly, Sayu. No way I'd let you catch a cold. I got cloths to rub me down and warm me up. So I'm doing fine.
Chunlan led the way, with Sayu and Dao trusting the light of his lamp to guide their steps. None were dressed appropriately for such an environment. Chunlan had given his coat to Sayu, leaving him with a thick, though not quite thick enough, sweater to battle the elements. Sayu was still woefully underdressed, even with the coat, but she was still much better off than Dao, who had fashioned a pitiful covering by cutting armholes into a hempen bag.
There's a Matagi lodge just up ahead,
Chunlan urged.
Just hang in there!
The only thing that inspired them to continue this terrible trek was that the route itself was short. Though the foreigners had no defense against the cold, they knew, as woodland wanderers would, how to navigate uneven terrain well. It was only this knowledge that helped them conserve the valuable energy they needed to keep up with the natives of the land. They reached the cabin around midnight.
I almost don't know how we made it through that.
Chunlan heaved with relief as they entered.
We've got time to rest if you need it, though it probably won't be too comfortable.
The cabin had been constructed as a supply stop for those climbing the mountain rather than as any formal lodging, consisting of a single room that groaned with every push of the wind outside. It did so even as Chunlan opened the door. He could feel the vibrations of its planks even with his gloves. Yet ramshackled it appeared on the surface, it remained firm in its foundation, indicating it was regularly cared for. Chunlan's mind wandered to Raiju once they were indoors. He imagined that, based on the direction it had gone when fleeing the Oni, it was likely hiding somewhere near the summit. That lined up with what he already knew of the beast. No one had found its lair in the areas inhabited by other bears, and the area in question showed evidence of lightning damage. Their best course of action, if they were to find it, was to resupply and strike out quickly to reach the summit by dawn. Chunlan turned to his companions.
There's more stuff left here than I was expecting. Take whatever you can carry. Huh. So you can shove a short blade into this wooden hollow thing and make it into a spear,
Dao observed of one of the weapons among the stock.
That's called a fukuru nagasa,
Chunlan explained.
It's an offshoot of the knife I have with me.
While he was busy gathering anything that was vital to their survival, Sayu took a look at the hunting gear and specialized equipment in the farther corner of the cabin. She was quietly curious about her surroundings, both from a simple, innocent perspective and from a deeply intellectual perspective.
Oh, yes! Fur! Where have you been all my life, you beautiful bastard?
Dao, on the other hand, dived into the supplies with abandon, eventually caressing and curling up among a pile of warm furs. There was a fire pit in the center of the room. Sayu approached.
Looks like we've got an Irori, too. I'll go ahead and get a fire going.
Thanks. Wait, where did you learn that word? Chunlan was puzzled as he continued sorting through supplies.
It was already strange enough that you pegged me as a Matagi at all.
I learned Irori from this book,
she responded, removing her book from the pouch at her waist.
And the traveler who gave it to me was a Matagi, the same person I told you about before.
It was the book she had been so particular about when they first met, entitled Fundamentals of Indigenous Cultures. Chunlan found that the binding was quite aged when he took it into his hands and flipped through it, but it still held up very well over the years.
Oh, this book is over 25 years old.
The information would have been out of date to more modernized cultures, but all that was written on the Matagi was still very relevant, making it all the more apparent to him that their lives had not changed with the passing of time. The book contained the names, lifestyles, and beliefs of various cultures and ethnicities Chunlan had never heard of before, as well as objective insights from the author, adding a beating heart behind its logical prose. Sayu and Dao's people, the Woodland Wanderers, were also mentioned.
I found your people,
Chunlan said, reading on with interest.
You sound like a pretty peaceful group, the way you're written here.
He wondered again how the Woodland Wanderers had such a rare artifact in their possession, and why they were guarding it, though most of that had been answered at full volume during their windy trek. The Woodland Wanderers had an agreement with the Septian Church. They would collect any artifacts the Church's people could not reach, and in exchange, they were given the freedom to use them at their discretion, indulging in their many benefits, before handing them over to the Church at designated shrines. The book itself only gave vague hints as to this part of their background. Instead, it was full of excerpts on how they supported themselves with woodcrafts and assisted merchants during peaceful times, as well as brimming with notes detailing their relationships with other cultures and their day-to-day aesthetics. I doubt anything written here is new to you, but the book itself is special? Chunlan guessed.
That's right. I'm only here today because of it and the person who gave it to me.
Sayu answered.
You might say he and it are motivation.
Must be nice to be that motivated by something. For me, it's more. Both she and Dao had found their own purposes in the ways of their people. Sayu in particular held a deep faith in her heritage, and that was key in her reasoning for being on this mountain. Chunlan failed to resonate with that even now. What was he on this mountain for? What inspired him to be here in this moment? No matter how far he looked within, all he could see was a deep, unending emptiness.
It's fine if you can't relate.
Dao's voice snapped him out of a meditation that was longer than he intended. Now back to his senses, Chunlan looked to see the young man now stretched out over straw, and Sayu crouched in front of the Aurori.
Sayu's the only bookworm we've got, so even to us, she just sees the whole world differently. Sayu's bigger perspective has helped me find my way more than a few times,
Dao continued, standing to give Chunlan a charitable pat on the shoulder.
So I get what you're going through. But you don't have to be set on something like her or have any deep meaning in what you're doing right now if it's just not there. If you can't think of anything that motivates you, just do whatever you're doing now, and maybe, in time, that motivation will find you.
Yeah. You're right. Chunlan was moved by words that were precisely what he needed in the moment to ground him. For now, all we can do is do what we were planning to do anyway. Keep moving. He did not know when he would be free of the chains of uncertainty he found himself wrestling with. What he did know was that something had changed about the uncertainty itself, and his new companions were the catalyst to that change. Perhaps this would further lead to something, perhaps even lead to the same exact thing that birthed motivation in them. Their silence between conversation as they watched the quietly flickering fire had been deafened by the wailing winds outside. But as the fire grew, so did its voice, and Chunlan began to think that even through a blizzard too great for words was still a straight, clear path. To be continued. Chapter 8. In the Depths of His Memories.
Listen, Chunlan. Before we go after Raiju, there's something I want to say,
began the young boy's father.
We Matagi follow the ways of our people. In doing that, we respect this mountain and stand watch over it for its beasts. Do you know why we do that?
It was not the first time he asked that. In fact, he had asked this countless times. But never had he asked it while they were on the way to slay a beast, when even Kiyun Olkis had failed. Rather than ask why his father, the current chief in the legendary hunter's absence, would bring it up now, Chunlan repeated his usual answer. His father never asked anything without a reason, so the answer would come with time.
The blessings of the mountain are the blessings of Adios. We protect them so as to show our thanks to her.
That's right. We believe this, and we aren't wrong for it. But I think we have a greater purpose than even that answer. I want you to ponder what that is as we hunt Raiju.
So what? Does the old answer mean you've been full of it all this time?
His father laughed.
Sorry, Chunlan. I meant to save this conversation for after you'd become a man. But here you are, hunting Raiju with me. It makes for a fine opportunity.
The lesson continued as they ascended the mountain and were soon near the midpoint of Mount Whitecrown, an area where bears were known to live. No one knew where Raiju made its nest, so their only option in tracking it was to go where it was last seen and hope there were tracks to follow.
We are able to see tomorrow because we take the lives of other creatures. These creatures are no different. They fight to survive, and sometimes that means hunting us as we hunt them. Even Raiju, as it casts its monstrous shadow over the whole of this mountain, is no exception.
Right, Chunlan responded pensively.
After 20 years of hunting with Kiyunolkis, I came to a realization. We are on equal footing with the beasts. We may not be able to see eye to eye with them, but we understand that we face life as they do.
We face life? Okay, so what does that mean? Chunlan was familiar with the concept of giving thanks to life and taking it, but there was something abstract about the concept of facing it. He was also not the best at wrapping his mind around the philosophical, preferring straightforward paths with simple, direct answers. Anything that strayed beyond that risked him getting lost in his own thoughts.
I don't think there's a singular answer to that question. The journey to try and find your own answer is as important as the answer itself. Without the journey, life cannot be faced. It would be meaningless.
Meaningless?
That's right. Face life. Accept it. Your struggles will reveal guideposts on your journey that only you can see.
Young Chunlan thought about the obstacles on the path that made his life. At the same time, he considered the lives of others who had chosen different paths, wondering what their answers came to be through it all. Had those who left the village run away from the ways of their people, or had they chosen to leave after finding something that gave their lives meaning? But was there meaning in becoming poachers or trophy hunters for the nobility? He doubted it. This is going over my head, he finally admitted.
Knowing that is a victory in itself. Pride blinds us from our correct path.
A gentle expression sat on his father's face. There were moments when he was deeply stern, but for now, as he presented his son a question even those twice and thrice his age would wrestle with, he presented his softest side. What does this have to do with Raiju? Chunlan asked.
I'm sure you already know this, but the hunt for Raiju is a dangerous one.
The sound of their footfalls on the snow halted. Chunlan's father used the pause to give his son time to consider the reason behind their talk.
What I'm saying is that we might end up being the ones hunted this time.
He continued.
The risk of us losing our lives is higher than any normal hunt. Perhaps the odds are even against us. Do you understand what could happen, Chunlan?
He nodded in response. He understood well, but he didn't want to put it into words.
Accept the reality. Even if this hunt doesn't end the way we want it to. I thought this might be my last chance to tell you that.
In his short life, he had come to have a very simple dream. Hunt Raiju with his father, protect the mountain, and surpass Kiyun. It was a way he could show the other vagabond youths his age that there was meaning in the path they had not chosen. So how did this new course of thought his father proposed fit into this dream? Was it a new one that deviated entirely, failing to fit the curated mold of the path he chose to walk? The answer did not matter. It was not long until Chunlan lost it all, his dream and his father. What he found among the broken pieces of his life that came afterward was not any true answer to his father's question, but rather a realization that he, indeed, could not accept reality, leaving only a festering hatred in his heart. The rising sun stained the snow atop Mount Whitecrown with a subtle gold, and the lone Matagi and 2 woodland wanderers carried more than their weight in supplies as they continued to heave and climb. The blizzard itself has blown over, but the strong gusts continued to persist, bringing with it sheets of snow in what may as well have been the same thing. Each sheet reflected the morning glow, making them feel as though they were being assailed by brilliant motes of pure light. As planned, they arrived at the summit just as dawn was breaking. Their speed was aided by the fact that woodland wanderers were light on their feet, even when weighed down by seemingly endless amounts of gear. Now that they were dressed properly for the weather, they could tackle the cold with a speed that put even a local to shame. They still knew nothing about Raiju's location beyond it being somewhere within the vicinity. It was unclear whether they should first scout the place out, planning their next move carefully, or if they should strike as soon as they caught sight of the beast. Chunlan and Sayu continued to discuss options as they moved. No matter how he tried, Chunlan could not calm himself down. It had nothing to do with doubt in his or his companion's abilities. It was that the yet-to-be-seen foe they were hunting had the kind of strength that made even the most thorough of plans seem insufficient.
We're finally going to have the last part. It's been divided for so long.
Right? Dao chimed in agreement with Seiyu's musings. And if things go smooth enough, we might even finish up that bastard who keeps tailing us. We'll finally be able to face all the people he killed.
I'm kind of excited to see what it does when it's complete. The Blade of the Thunder Heavens sure makes it sound like it'll be impressive to me.
Well, Chunlan began wryly, the Oni will be the perfect test subject once you find out, won't he? Neither Seiyu nor Dao were particularly distracted by the suggestion. They remained focused, their eyes looking straight ahead, with no immediate dangers on their mind to stand in the way of their goal. In Seiyu's case, retrieving the last part for the cylindrical artifact was not optimism, but the next step that was simply going to be. The Woodland Wanderers and the values they acquired from their tight-knit environment fascinated him. On the surface, their traditions were simple. They patrolled the eastern side of the continent, retrieved artifacts, and passed them along to the Septian Church. And yet, each cycle of this journey was riddled with value and supplemented by countless customs that had long been passed down from generation to generation. Even as Sayu and Dao made slight deviations from their people's path, they balanced it by continuing to respect and adhere to their many traditions and values they had long loved and accepted. What did he value? As he observed them, Chunlan thought back to the days when his father was still alive, when he had a simple, pure goal. When he had that goal, he never felt a moment's resistance against the ways of the Matagi.
What do I have now?
He wondered aloud. His purpose was shattered, leaving behind a constant feeling of questioning the nature of life itself, in a puzzle he was no closer to solving now as he was then. The only thing sustaining Chunlan through his days was that it was natural for the body to breathe, eat, and sleep. Meeting these two was an outlier to his daily routine, and one that sparked something in him he had not felt in a long, long time. Could these strangers who possessed what he lacked lead him to reunite with that feeling of having a purpose in life? "Look out!" Dao's shout snapped Chunlan back to his senses. In that same instant, he felt a light jolt and something impacting his body. "Dao!" cried Sayu. Dao had shoved both Chunlan and Sayu aside, and a heartbeat later, lightning flashed in an explosion near him. Something struck the youth like an invisible wall, throwing him to the ground, and smoke rose from his skin as convulsions coursed through his body. It was the worst possible outcome among their discussed options. Raiju had attacked first.
Dao, are you all right?
Yeah, I'm just glad you're okay, Sayu.
Dao croaked.
My body's numb, but Granny Haku's charm is nothing to sniff at. I think I can even stand.
Sayu realized, and vocalized, that the paint he had covering his body was a ward that must have been an insulating resin. After confirming that Dao was well and calm, Chunlan retrieved his binoculars.
Sorry, Dao, I let my guard down,
he said.
Don't worry about it. Even if you noticed, you might not have been able to dodge it. Just focus on finding it.
He wasn't about to make the same mistake twice. He knew if the King of Thunder could see them, then they could see it as well.
There!
He found his longtime nemesis. It was a fitting throne for the conqueror of this land and wielder of lightning through its very claws. At the highest peak of Mount Whitecrown, looking down at them, was Raiju. To be continued. Chapter 9. The Appointed Hour.
Over there, see? That's where the avalanche occurred. What a mess.
How come they've been happening all over lately?
The blizzard was over. and the morning sun was shedding light upon the fresh powder of snow along Mount Whitecrown. Observing this as they climbed through one of the mountain's trails were two men wearing puzzled expressions, one tall and thin, the other short and stout. Both were the very picture of traditional Matagi in their straw hats and coats, each wielding a spear and a hunting rifle. That there was an avalanche in itself was not surprising. They happened often. Yet being so used to them was also why the locals were keenly aware that something was off about this one in particular. They could fast recognize impurities that threatened the mountain, and right now, this event was quite impure. Their steps hastened as they approached the site of the avalanche. Even from a distance, seeing how unnatural it looked only heightened their unease.
I heard Chunlan was talking to the chief yesterday.
The stout Matagi piped up.
But have you seen him around here since then? I know he hunts around here sometimes.
Chunlan wasn't known for late-night hunts, but none had caught sight of him since the day before. It was another factor of the scene that unsettled them.
He learned his ways from the man trained by Kiyun. I think he'll be all right,
reassured the thin Matagi.
Now I get why you're worried. Boy's had a lot on his mind. If that were ever to come into play mid-hunt.
He turned down the chief's offer again. I don't blame him with how things went with his father. But at the same time, our kids surely do have it rough.
Though they felt for Chunlan, they also couldn't treat it as though it had nothing to do with them. Their youth were leaving the village one after another, and not just that. They were struggling with the concept of what it meant to be a Matagi. It was this that had put their people in the dwindling position they were in now.
Got word there was strange lightning to be seen on the mountain last night. You think Chunlan went to get revenge on Raiju?
They floated more questions and speculation between one another as they arrived on site. Starting with the thin Matagi.
This was no natural avalanche.
But then, who did it?
It could have been Raiju. I know it's a beast of thunder, but there's got to be more to this that we aren't seeing.
Well, I guess it doesn't matter. I'm just worried about Chunlan.
They had no idea what unimaginable threat from another land was awakening beneath the snow.
Chunlan. Raiju. The name of the boy who buried me. And the name of my prey.
Beneath snow and ice, the weakened Oni pondered inwardly the names of the two Matagi were speaking of. And the more he pondered, the more a power inside him ignited. He could hear the sound of thunder and the echoes of those names he now hated and hungered more, birthing the perfect catalyst to reawakening the rage that fueled his every waking moment.
Look! What's that light?
Is there something underneath the snow?
As these fires continued to burn brighter and brighter within the Oni, his flesh began to quiver with the need to hunt. A terrifying light once more glowed through the patterns inked across his body.
Chunlan. Mouse. Raiju. Chunlan. Mouse. Raiju.
The Oni awakened as his burning emotions pushed through his sensory threshold. Steam erupted from the snow like a geyser, revealing his body enveloped in a mysterious light and startling the two Matagi.
Something's come out of the snow!
I've never seen anything like it. Is it a monster?
The men, despite all their experience, were struck with a fear that left them falling on their behinds and wailing before the creature that appeared from a bed of steam and ice. The Oni spared the two a glance as their mouths hung agape.
Chunlan, the mouse, and Raiju. Where are they?
You know Chunlan and Raiju?
Cried the thin man. He worked to regain control of his senses once they heard the man speak. He then leveled his hunting rifle toward the Oni.
Chunlan and Raiju are the perfect prey for me. As for you two, you will do as an appetizer.
I don't know what you mean by that.
The thin man seethed.
But if you plan to harm someone from our village, then you are an impurity of this mountain. Now get!
He then fired as his stout companion returned to his feet and aimed his spear. But there was no hope of the bullet reaching the Oni. In an instant, it had been blocked by an earthen wall, vanishing in a spray of harmless sparks.
Where'd that rock come from?
The thin Matagi cried.
This man! He really is a monster!
How'd a thing like him manage to get so close to the village?
Before the eyes of the Matagi, now once again overwhelmed with terror, the rock wall crackled and crumbled to the ground. It did not appear as though it was the Oni's intention to do this, but it had at least fulfilled its purpose of shielding him from the bullet.
It appears I've not fully recovered. A trifling issue,
He resolved with a brutal, level tone.
I have a small feast right here to warm me up before I hunt them down.
The Oni did not hesitate to feed his disadvantage into his hunger for violence, stoking the flames of his fighting spirit till it became a full rage for the hapless men. With it, he summoned a spear of stone.
What is he? Is this the curse of the mountain?
Pull yourself together. If we don't stop him, think of what will happen to the village.
The Oni crept closer to them, making the dim red light glowing from him dance before their eyes. Despite its crude make, the spear in his hand seemed vicious enough to end their lives in an instant. All they could think of this man before them was that he must have been a demon from Gehenna. The morning air of Mount Whitecrown would have split with the sound of a useless gunshot and wild shrieks of death, were it not for the roaring wind. A feeling of impending disaster caressed Chunlan's neck as they kneeled in a cave at the summit to keep out of Raiju's sight. It had nothing to do with the beast he was facing now. Something else now violated the mountain.
Something's got the spirits of the mountain in an uproar,
he muttered.
I feel it too,
replied Sayu.
I felt his presence plenty of times before.
Though the trio found Raiju, they were in no position to implement the plans they conjured along the way. Knowing that the Oni was awake and likely to head toward them added insult to injury.
He's already up?
Cried Dao in surprise.
Then we're running out of time!
Chunlan nodded.
Yeah, we have to take down Raiju before he arrives. No way am I letting him steal this kill from me!
He did not know how long it would take the now-freed demon in human skin to pursue them to the summit, meaning every second battling, breathing, even thinking, was a second wasted in an unknown countdown. He could take days, he could take hours.
We're going to have to be quick about this. No distractions. Right. There's no time to go back to the cabin and think more on what to do next.
Chunlan agreed, reviewing the goods they carried with them from the cabin. They were all limited in their function, but some were indeed brought as countermeasures against the Raiju's incredible power. The question was, would they be enough to stay them from the jaws of defeat? It was time for Chunlan to put his knowledge as a Matagi to the test. It was a strategy he had been wondering for years how to apply in his own life, a strategy he had not used for years, a strategy that he left behind to the day of his father's death.
I think I've got a plan,
he started.
Have you heard of the Makigari tactic?
Makigari was a group hunting tactic that was deeply rooted in Matagi tradition. In essence, it involved one or multiple members acting as guides, Seko, to surround it to prevent escape. An aggressive offensive would then be utilized to lead it to a specific spot, where the sniper, the Buppa, would finish off the cornered beast. It was a tactic generally carried out by those who had long hunted together, as it hinged heavily on both the leadership of whoever headed the hunt and implicit trust between the rest of the team. It was a difficult tactic to pull off even then, and yet it had to work with Chunlan's new companions.
I got no idea,
replied Dao. Chunlan explained in detail what it was before following up with a personal anecdote.
It's a way we hunt. Me and my dad tried it with Raiju a long time ago. We actually had one over it back then, but... well, this time we're much better equipped, and we're up one person. I think we can make it work.
The reality was more that not a single other tactic came to mind. Chunlan was deeply concerned about their ability to coordinate. Even if he had enough confidence in his own skills to compensate, it would be difficult to sync up with Sayu and Dao on a technical level. Could them being raised in completely different cultures change things too drastically for it to work?
Sounds good, Chunlan. Let's go with that.
Sayu was surprisingly quick to voice her agreement to the plan.
So, we've got the traditional methods of the Matagi, an artifact, and thunderproof equipment to work with then.
Up till now, Sayu had been a thinker, a logical individual. Chunlan fully expected her to reject the idea and propose something of her own. The surprise must have shown on his face, as she continued.
It's not impossible. We just need to minimize any quirks we have that might impact our cooperation, and cover the rest with equipment. One person's problem to solve is everyone's problem to solve here.
This encouragement came with a smile. Another surprise. Chunlan supposed she believed in this tactic more than he did. She was right, of course, that both sides were in the same awkward position of having to find out how the other one worked in a short time. She was also right that this could be solved by deviating just slightly from the traditional form of the tactic and utilizing the things they had, the equipment and the artifact, to cover their shortcomings.
That vagabond told me, hit the unexpected with the unexpected,
she said. Certainly, they were doing just that.
All right!
Dao piped up cheerfully.
If we've got your endorsement, Sayu, then I don't see any reason not to back it up.
He then chided Chunlan playfully about having more faith in his own plan, for no plan goes well when its proposer lacks proper faith in it. Doubt must have accompanied Chunlan's expression of surprise for him to say it. Dao was more brawn than brain, but he was very perceptive of others' emotions, meaning he knew exactly what to say to help someone who was wavering at the time. That chiding was just what Chunlan needed.
You're both right, he said.
You're just as caught up in this as me, so I'm going to put my trust in this plan, and you. No more doubts as to whether this will work. It was time to execute their very own brand of the Makigari tactic. To be continued. Chapter 10. Makigari. Raiju's habitat was the perfect place for this beast that topped the food chain to call home. It sat at the mountain's highest point like a king would his throne, the black stormy clouds swirling overhead in a natural royal crown. Through thunderous applause did it create its weapon, and its subjects below, its prey, never failed to succumb to it once stricken. There was just one thing the beast did not realize about this place, that its terrain, impregnable on the surface, was also the perfect environment to set a trap. There were two paths to reach the summit. One was at the end of a long spiraling trail that looped around its peak. The other was a straight, steep path, surrounded on both sides by high rock walls. The first of the hunters who came to claim Raiju's life appeared from the spiraled road, shouting at the top of his lungs, a call unique to the Woodland wanderers.
You sleepin', Mr. Bear?
Dao shouted.
'Cause I'm ready to wrestle!
Dao leaped from rock to rock, his unique hunting call being shouted between taunts and insults. In a bag slung over his back were a number of single-shot rifles from the cabin, ancient even by the Matagi standards, that were relics of a fallen kingdom. His cries were used in the past to intimidate meek rabbits and fleet-footed foxes into submission, but Raiju was no small prey, and showed no hint of fear upon hearing them. This, however, was well within the realm of expectations. Drawing one of the smaller rifles from the bag, he made a blistering show out of firing a nearby rock. Raiju paused for only a moment before roaring in turn, fur bristling from head to toe from this mortal threat. Perhaps it still possessed memories of being hunted by the Matagi as a normal bear. But whatever the reason, the sound of the shot was enough for it to understand its position from hunter to hunted.
Ha-ha! Where's your tough guy act now, you big furball?
Dao continued leaping from rock to rock while dodging Raiju's impulsive lightning strikes. After throwing his spent rifle so that it stood upright in the ground, he pulled a second one and fired without hesitation. This one hit its mark precisely, causing the King of Thunder to howl upon being struck. The bullet was too weak and Dao too far for it to pierce through the beast's thick hide, but this too was expected. Raiju sent out a flash of lightning as an instinctive counter to the pain delivered, but it was strange. Rather than deliver the devastating shock it was meant to, it passed through him harmlessly instead.
It really worked!
Dao grinned with pleasant surprise. He was touching the upright rifle he discarded after use, allowing the lightning fire to pass through him, it, and into the ground. He was positively giddy with the discovery.
Oh, you're a genius, Sayu! I never would have thought to use these as lightning rods!
So long as he positioned the spent rifles like so, he could creep closer to Raiju and never have to worry about the more elemental properties of its offensive.
I've got as many of these as I've got shots. Now time to show what the Woodland Wanderers can really do!
Dao belted another hunting call, and with every shot fired and rod placed, the weight on his back was lighter, allowing him to move at an ever faster pace. He moved in a circular motion, confusing the bear as he led it successfully toward the other path to the summit, sandwiched on both sides with rock walls.
Guess no matter how strong it is, it's still got the brains of a beast,
he muttered to himself before calling out to his companion.
It's headed your way, Sayu!
I'm ready, Dao. Bring it in.
While still gathering its electricity for yet another counterattack, Raiju was guided into the straight and narrow path. It was met with a sudden barrier of mist that bathed the beast in its own sparks.
Got it!
Dao shouted. The barrier Raiju stumbled into was not a physical one, but rather a cage of energy strung between countless arrows stabbed into both sides of the rock wall. Moisture from the air glistened off the arrows' exposed tips.
I've never done this many at once,
Sayu began.
but that doesn't mean I can't do it.
The barrier formed from the fusion of Sayu's energy with the cylinder of the frozen sky's power was, in essence, one of pure fog. The more Raiju tried to force its way through this barrier, the wetter it became, causing its natural electricity to short out. Any attempt to step into it caused a wealth of pain.
The way out is just as bad,
Sayu affirmed, shooting additional arrows behind it and filling them with more power, expanding the cage that much farther. Now, even if it were to turn around to run out of the corridor, it could no longer do so without sustaining considerable damage from its own thunder.
Yahoo! That's got it pinned down. Think the rest of the plan's gonna go this smooth?
This won't stop it for long,
Sayu responded.
but it should hold long enough for Chunlan to give us the signal.
Raiju could not escape without passing through the cage of fog, but despite having been transformed through possession of an ancient artifact, it was still a wild beast at heart. It had no concept of surrender, only survival, and would persist even if its only route to tomorrow would do it harm. Roaring wildly, the beast threw itself into the cage wall, blooming a constant fountain of sparks from its massive body.
Adios! Crazy thing's gonna cook itself alive!
I haven't seen Chunlan's signal.
Sayu reported.
I don't know if I can hold it much longer.
The cylinder of the frozen sky slotted into her crossbow cycled between losing its brilliance and pulsing with flashes of blue light. Each time electricity surged through Raiju's body, it flickered brightly in response, almost too brightly, as though the cage and the beast's resistance were pushing it beyond its capabilities. Sayu knew that putting any more power into this would risk the danger of an explosion that would leave her far worse off than her target. Realizing this as well, Dao refused to stand around and do nothing. Dao had one other source of protection, a leather cloth from the cabin he covered in glass powder and resin paint on his body. Wrapping himself from the head down with this repurposed insulating cloak and protecting himself with gloves made from the same material, Dao bounded through the cage of fog and closed in on Raiju. Flashes of light scorched the robe, but he pushed forward until he was directly before the object of their hunt.
Dao, are you crazy?
Nothing crazy about standing in a cage made by you. All right, Raiju. You're in for a real shock, 'cause it's about to get unbearable for you!
He then threw himself into the body of the beast, lashing out with his protected fists. Though the attacks he landed were of no real threat, the insulated strikes triggered waves of electricity that surged through it with each devastating punch.
This works for me way better than any gun. Worth the dive!
Dao cracked before taking stance and drawing in a long breath. Planting his feet before the flinching King of Thunder, Dao focused on every muscle in his body and, while filling his lungs with the clean mountain air, became one with the environment's natural flow of life energy. Only when this reached its peak did he spring forward.
Shin!
Dao kicked off the ground, air trembling around him till Sayu could swear she saw snowflakes dancing from his body as he sent an incredible punch into Raiju's chest. This alone was enough to send tremors through its whole form. This secret craft, Shin, could mean many things: heart, core, quake, deity, and was among the ultimate techniques in a martial arts style created by the Woodland Wanderers. It required synchronizing every part of the body, bone and muscle and all, and compressing one's strength until one forced this dense power forward like a coil in a trap. Certainly, this kind of precise, powerful technique spoke to the wisdom gained through generations of journeying and surviving the wild.
I can't believe it, Dao. You mastered Shin.
Sayu followed up Dao's attack by sending a shower of bolts from atop the rock wall down upon Raiju, preventing the staggering beast from steadying itself. Dao took the chance to send another blow to its throat. As it fell back, it no longer saw the cage's walls as a concern, pivoting to escape its hunters through fog and singed fur.
I doubt that'll kill it, but it looks like we put it on the ropes.
Sayu cheered into the corridor to Dao.
Are you all right? I'd love to tell you I am, but my gloves are done for.
Dao responded, raising his arms up to display his gloves as he did so.
I can't keep this up much longer. Okay, we've just got to keep it busy, so I'll take over on the offensive.
There was a hint of hesitation in her voice as she agreed to this. She was already pushing the cylinder of the frozen sky to its limits. Dao's craft was also one of great strength, and she doubted her crossbow would have nearly the same stopping power as it. Not seconds later into this train of thought did the sign that they were waiting for make itself known. A deep bass sound echoed off the mountain, carrying far and strong despite its low pitch. It was proof the two of them had fulfilled their role in the tactic.
That's the conch shell. Chunlan's ready,
Sayu exclaimed.
He sure kept us waiting long enough, but now he's got me all fired up for round 2. Now come on, Sayu. Let's take him down for good. Right.
As Sayu descended, she released the section of the cage between Raiju and the summit. Doing this would help Sayu to amplify the impacts of her attacks as she concentrated much-needed moisture into each bolt fired. She then reunited with Dao and, with their backs against the still-existing cage wall blocking the other path downward, she unleashed a final goading strike at the beast's back. Sayu and Dao followed behind it as it ran, believing their companion ahead would be able to exact the next stage of their plan, driving Raiju back up toward the highest point of the summit. The king's throne would soon become its tombstone. To be continued. Chapter 11. To mark the hour. He knew they would guide Raiju to him. Though it defied logic, Chunlan had such faith in his new companions that even as he waited and waited, the hand on his muzzleloader never trembled with anxiety. He remained calm even as the moment that would decide his fate approached, blew on his conch shell, and pictured their daring, triumphant smiles in his mind's eye. Signaling with such a loud sound gave his position away and was tantamount to suicide under any other circumstances, but he wanted it to drown out even the roars of the very beast they hunted. He wanted to be found. He was confident. He no longer feared. And it was all thanks to them. The conch shell summoned hope to him as he heard the calls of his companions following the booming footfalls of his sworn enemy. Sayu and Dao were acting as decoys, laying a trap with the intent of driving the King of Thunder into Chunlan's range. At the top of the spiral path Dao had used to ascend, the Woodland Wanderers set the perfect trap, a modified bear trap, to shower it with water and shards of metal. There was no better method to continue throwing Raiju's natural abilities into chaos and stopping it in its tracks. And if the beast were to leap from the summit's cliffs into the spiral path below to retreat, it would be welcomed still by more traps and weapons set by Chunlan.
It's finally time. Though I never thought it would happen like this,
thought Chunlan. He was hit with a mixture of emotions brewing inside of him, so many that he could not concern himself with labeling them all, or most of them. Of these, one unexpected emotion manifested more clearly than the rest.
I don't feel any hatred toward Raiju.
Never once since the time he lost his father to the beast did he ever feel hatred for it. Not really. Not in the way he thought he did. He felt loss and grief upon losing the last of his living relatives, but in his heart of hearts, he saw his father as a true Matagi, who fell after fighting for his life on equal terms with the mountain. His father had bet his flesh, his blood, struggling amongst its blessed nature, but his blade was simply unable to surpass the survival instincts of his opponent. How could Chunlan turn such a natural, beautiful thing into a grudge? How could he let the fear of his father's death consume him to a point that he forgot not all was truly lost? What motivated Chunlan in this moment was a desire to complete what had been started by someone he loved. That was all.
This isn't vengeance for you,
He thought of his father.
I still don't fully understand everything you said back then. But I'm here. A life facing a life. And I will keep facing it with all that I am.
To Chunlan, this mild understanding was enough to leave him content. His companions from a foreign land restored in him a sort of hope that his years past were not in vain, but rather guideposts that brought him to this very moment. To the moment when his days of simply breathing, eating, and sleeping from sunrise till sunset would end. To the moment where he realized he was still alive.
Here they come.
Chunlan heard an explosion of thunder from the rock he hid behind on the spiral path. Above him at the highest point of the summit, Sayu and Dao's voices shouted in response to the conch shell as they continued chasing down their hunt. Not a few heartbeats passed before Chunlan could sense Raiju's presence directly above him. He then put all his weight into giving a rope in his one hand a single, sharp tug, leaning as he did so. One end of the cliff above him began to crumble. A single boulder that rested on the corner of the sheer peak had been yanked free of its position, and with support wholly lost, the throne of the king trembled ominously before collapsing under the beast's weight. It was a good thing he had seen Sayu's powers as she buried the Oni in the snow. Sayu and Dao had not blocked the mountain path just to give Chunlan time to set a few traps, but more so he could turn the entire area into one massive, similar trap to what he witnessed before. To any observer, he may have made pulling a rope to trigger the collapse of a cliff look simple. What he did, however, was delicately balance the boulder on a rod beforehand to leverage the rock in the direction he desired. It was almost a miracle he could get it ready in the short time Sayu and Dao had to stall their target.
Raiju!
Finally chased to a dead end, Raiju slid down the summit among a shower of falling rock fragments and snow. It was only around 15 arches up. Not enough of a fall to kill it, but Chunlan had prepared its landing point with caltrops and other such traps to pin it down. Every fiber of his being cried for him to end it then. Yet, regrettably, reality often makes a mockery of even the best-laid plans. Raiju was thrown off its trajectory by the uneven face of the cliffside, well away from the trap's set, landing instead right before Chunlan.
So that's how it's going to go,
he muttered aloud.
Fine! That won't stop me!
It was almost better than his original plan, even. Knowing he could end the beast's life personally, rather than through a trap, gave him a sense of fulfillment, as though something had guided them to this fitting end.
Your false reign is over, Raiju! A Matagi never misses his target twice!
A fire erupted from within him. With Mount Whitecrown watching once more, nothing stopped him and the beast from continuing the fight that started 5 fateful years prior. Chunlan had his back pressed against some boulders that had fallen along the mountain path, while his opponent was backed by the sheet face of the summit.
Let's finish this!
Chunlan moved first. He had to press his advantage, while his exhausted opponent was still slumped against the rocks. Drawing arrowheads and other small blades and metal bits from a ute bag, he sprinted to scatter them around the beast before it could recover enough energy. It seemed the king also hoped to end this quickly. Even as Chunlan tossed the metal, it took the chance to impulsively unleash a fierce lightning attack, a fatal mistake on its part.
Got you!
Countless blades stuck in the ground and flying through the air absorbed the electrical strike and exploded, throwing up a curtain of smoke intermingled with sparks and flashes. Chunlan sprang through it all, drawing that much closer to Raiju. The beast convulsed as sparks scorched its fur and discharged energy continually shocked its body.
Never been pushed this far, have you?
Taunted Chunlan.
Well, sorry, but I'm not done!
Chunlan saw the surprise in Raiju's eyes, for even a beast as powerful as it would falter upon sight of a human covered in smoke, appearing and thrusting a rifle into its open mouth.
Doesn't matter how thick your skin is from this distance!
The rifle spat fire into the bear's mouth, and fresh blood, redder than even that of the flames from the shot, spurted from its mouth, staining Chunlan's pale skin and the bear's dark fur. Still, perhaps due to the natural desire to struggle on, it drew breath. Chunla noticed its eyes still moved to focus on him, and even its arm being raised.
No!
Chunlan drew back his rifle to escape, but with its jaw now free, Raiju retaliated with wild, unbelievable speed, sinking its teeth into his shoulder. How long had it been since a beast had managed this? It was the first thought to flash through Chunlan's mind as intense waves of pain sank further into him. It was the only thing that could mildly stay the waves of pain that now persisted. With contact made and his senses keen from this terrible sensation, he could almost hear the bear's thoughts as if it growled audibly.
You will not escape me.
You're the one who won't escape me!
Its jaw was soaked in blood as it continued to ignore the bullet burning inside its body. Chunlan made no attempt to tear himself away. On the contrary, shifting only as much as possible while locked in its jaws to get a better grip, he began plunging his nagasa into its neck again and again with his free hand, electricity crackling through the length of the blade. Both crashed to the ground, their thirst for the blood of the other swirling in the air. Its teeth continued to bite, and his blade continued to stab until neither could any longer. After a few moments of pure silence, it was Chunlan who rose, his coat and skin soaked in so much mud and red that could have been more his or his hunt's. He swayed as he attempted to steady his feet. He could hardly see through the blood dripping from his forehead, and the shoulder that has been endlessly punctured drooped, barely able to move. But he was alive, and the battle was not yet over. Chunlan took up his rifle again as the embers of life, though faint, continued in the eyes of the King of Thunder. It glared at the one who dealt its mortal blow, working despairingly to lift its limbs as its heart still beat, blood burbling through its mouth and wounds with every sharpened breath. So long as it lived, it would never stop trying to stand. With an eerie stillness about the moment, Chunlan slid around into his weapon before placing it between the beast's eyes. A final gunshot then wailed through the mountain, carrying with it the end of a legacy's life. To be continued. Chapter 12. Toward a New Journey. The day had come when one of the long-time threats disturbing the order of Mount Whitecrown was no more. Raiju, the false monarch none wished for, was finally felled by none other than a young man with whom it shared a cursed history.
You did it, Chunlan!
Piped Dao.
Nice work,
Followed Sayu.
That's our first objective cleared.
The companions who helped him achieve this event, knowing what it meant to him, raised their voices in congratulations as they approached. Chunlan listened, confirming the beast was indeed dead before collapsing and leaning back against its chest to catch his breath, a chill running through him as the tension of a life-or-death struggle released itself all at once. His bleeding was heavy, but it was dead. It really was dead. As he looked up to the sky, the clouds once conjured to divine an endless source of thunder cleared, revealing the sun at last.
Yeah,
Chunlan croaked.
I feel like I can finally move on now, even if it wasn't just my win. Without you, I'd have never beaten it.
Though this battle was a deeply personal one, to help him overcome his past, he could never pretend to believe that the result would have been the same had he come alone. It was not a fight with Chunlan, but with Chunlan and the Woodland Wanderers. It was a distinct, valuable level of camaraderie he had not felt in a long, long time.
Then we scratched each other's backs,
Sayu responded.
because, without you, we'd have never been able to get that last shard of the artifact.
Oh yeah. Wait a second. I'll get it for you.
Chunlan's body was heavy, but he lifted himself and turned toward the body, Nagasa in hand. He cut into the beast, forcing some thrust into his movements, despite discomfort from his wounds accompanying it. The hide was thick and tough to puncture.
Need some help there?
No, I can handle it, Dao. You keep on the lookout for our next fight.
He wanted to do this for them, just as they had helped him take down Raiju, completing a goal that had gone neglected for years. He wanted his strength to contribute toward the completion of their goal. As they watched and waited with anticipation, he almost felt embarrassed getting so worked up at the thought of helping them. He was grateful the blood splattered across his face hid his flushed cheeks. Dao continued on as Chunlan worked.
Well, that's checking one big thing off your list. You finally got revenge for your old man.
I don't think I'd call it revenge. I don't think my dad would have wanted me to treat it as something so simple either.
It sounds like something Sayu would say. But if it wasn't revenge, then what was it?
I'm not sure. You could say my next journey will be figuring that out. I guess.
Chunlan felt himself taking one more step toward understanding what his father said as he pulled a piece of metal out of the corpse.
But let's put that aside for your journey now.
The metal, which had been lodged in Raichu's stomach and had caused unnatural organs to bloom around it, turned out to be the blade of a knife. Chunlan felt it was heavier than his own Nagasa. However, its length and width reminded him more of the West's gladius.
So this was the part that transformed a normal bear into the King of Thunder, right?
He asked.
That's right,
answered Sayu.
It was on one of the scrolls in the shrine we were at before. There's no doubt about it. This is the last of the Thunder Flash blade.
So it really is part of a sword then.
After wiping the blade clean of Raichu's innards, he handed it to Sayu, and she slotted into the cylinder of the frozen sky. The two pieces indeed fit as though made for one another, further confirming his suspicions.
I thought the cylinder was some kind of flute at first, but it was a hilt all along.
That's right. This is the artifact we've been searching for. The Blade of the Thundering Skies.
As the two pieces became one, the blade emitted a dazzling flash of light and a cloud of fog. Once it cleared, what Sayu held in her hand was far from the rusted cylindrical trinket and blade covered in gore. It was now a clean, golden weapon of esteemed power. A creature of such delicate beauty that all three of them could feel the wisdom of ages past distilled within its form.
Still, we could have had control over better elements than lightning and water for when we faced the Oni. Do you know much about what this artifact was used for?
The scroll didn't say, but it at least had a basic overview of what the artifact does.
And now it's back at full power, right? Then does it do anything that could actually give us a leg up over him?
Mere minutes apart, 2 goals had been completed. The lightning that had tormented Mount Whitecrown through Raiju had now continued in its true form as the Blade of the Thundering Skies. Yet there was no time to bask in the warmth of victories won, for they had one last foe to face before all was done. One last foe powerful enough to sap them of their building hope and shatter the bonds they had forged.
Hate to interrupt, guys, but it looks like we're already out of time,
Dao warned.
He climbs a lot faster than I thought.
Yeah. Guess so,
Chunlan responded.
If we don't take him down,
Sayu spoke, mind focused and ready for what was to come.
This fight will never end.
There was a commotion down the mountain, one that, even at a distance, they could feel was laced with the intent to kill. Soon their eyes were fixed on the Oni. The strength of the murderous rage and willpower in the gaze he returned overshadowed anything the three of them could muster. To be continued. Chapter 13. An Unending Fight. The danger that had long loomed over Mount Whitecrown, Raiju, had been summarily defeated, and the Woodland Wanderers retrieved the Blade of the Thundering Skies. Yet there was still one final threat closing in on these young heroes, one devastating enough to destroy all the progress they struggled to make so far.
There you are, completed artifact and all,
the Oni growled eagerly.
That saves us some time. Raiju is gone, so all that's left for me to feast on is you.
Huh. You climb faster than I thought,
Dao commented.
You use one of your funny tricks again.
Flippant as Dao naturally sounded, Chunlan agreed with the observation. No matter how strong the Oni was, it had only been a short time since he revived himself from beneath the sheet of ice. Chunlan looked behind the man to see that the entire terrain he passed had been extensively altered. The demon's stone-crafting powers had been used to create stairs and other unnatural hitches and juts of earth to make it easier to conquer the treacherous terrain to the top.
Guess you don't call yourself the Stone Melder for nothing.
Of course. Did you think mere walls and spears were all I could muster?
The Oni flashed a wide grin that showed a numerous amount of teeth.
I hope you'll enjoy being my prey. Even you, Matagi. Your defeat of Raiju has captured my attention. You'll make for a suitable morsel.
Stop talking like we're slabs of meat!
Chunlan snapped. He understood well what the Oni wanted out of them, and it was far from profound. He had used his stone melding and fought his way to the summit, not just to steal the artifact, but to feed his lust for slaughter. Though Chunlan had no idea what awakened this desire, he could see that all living beings, regardless of their worth, were his prey.
We've no intention of being your morsels,
spat Sayu.
And we have nothing to do with whatever grudge or obsession you seem to have against our people. We came here to fulfill a goal we were given. That's all.
No amount of intimidation would set her on another path. Not once did Sayu waver as she glared straight into the eyes of the monster who had threatened the Woodland Wanderers for so long. Now, with the blade of the thundering skies in hand, she was filled with more than just determination. She was filled with a piercing, almost overwhelming willpower. The Oni laughed darkly at this display of bravado.
You think you won because of that? How pathetic. Think it all you like, but that artifact will soon be in my master's hands.
I have more than just this. I have more confidence, more knowledge, and a new friend.
As she said this, Sayu leveled her crossbow with the blade of the thundering skies slotted into it.
This time, I am going to beat you.
In Sayu, Chunlan saw that strength he had lost and was slowly regaining. He agreed with all those things, for he too had more confidence, knowledge, and friends to lift him up now. They had risked their lives as a team to conquer that which seemed impossible, and though he did not come out of the battle unscathed, the bonds he gained in the name of his victory would not go unremembered. Not wanting to let his companions down, Chunlan drew on what was left of his exhausted energy and pointed his rifle toward the Oni. This seemed to amuse the man greatly.
Chunlan, Matagi who brought down Raiju, I will gladly feast upon you. I do hope you'll entertain me in place of my prey that you had the audacity to take.
Better count me in too!
Dao shouted. He was the first to throw himself at the Oni, leaping into the air and kicking off a nearby wall to launch himself forward. As Dao readied for an explosive mid-air spinning kick at the back of this target's neck, Chunlan and Sayu readied themselves to fire their weapons at any given moment. To the surprise of none present, Dao's foot met with a shield of rock.
Playing the same hand twice won't work against me, you imbecile.
It's not a hand, it's a foot. So who's the real imbecile here, huh?
The Oni grunted in surprise as Dao kicked off the shield with ease. In that same instant, a bolt wrapped in fog flew toward the Oni's side, only just being blocked in the split second he shifted a makeshift shield from his right hand to his left. The bolt was not alone. It had come accompanied by a bullet fired from Chunlan, creating a deep crack in its stony foundation.
Ha! Sorry, but I'm just a diversion again.
Dao mocked.
Guess the same trick can work twice against you. Must be that your brain's made of rocks too.
I am the Stone Melder. Your childish taunts mean nothing to me.
Sayu, knock him on his ass!
Dao cried. Another bolt punctured the shield an instant later, erupting like a bolt of lightning with a loud clap and a flash of light. The shock shattered the initial crack, and hot wind from the explosive aftermath singed the hairs on the Oni's flesh. Sayu seemed very pleased with these results.
I'd call my first shot with this artifact a success. I might have an easier time figuring this out than I thought.
The attack was a perfect display of the absolute power she now wielded in her small hands. She still wrapped her bolts in fog born from the surrounding moisture in the air, but this fog now acted as a conductor of sorts, giving rise to long-range, precise lightning strikes. There was also one other thing she only just noticed after the lightning subsided.
I admit, you have yourself a dangerous weapon there. Quite a power that Raiju had hidden within itself.
And I don't think that's all the Blade of the Thundering Skies has got to it.
Sayu retorted.
It can control water and lightning to do what it did just now, yes. But I think its original purpose was to...
Her words were cut off as the Oni threw himself toward her.
You can be the first to die!
He formed a rock wall behind himself to hurl his great body in the direction of the two who burned him with their ranged attacks.
Watch out, Sayu!
Junlan tried to block the incoming stone spear flung at him, but the impact was enough to fragment the Nagasa he had hunted with for so many years to its hilt.
You believed you could block me with that pathetic knife? Fool!
There's still plenty of ways to stop you with it!
Chunlan dived to catch one of the shards from his beloved blade before throwing it at the Oni's face. It may have been damaged, but its deadly edge still remained, slicing along its target's eye on contact.
Impudent brat!
The enraged man roared from pain.
Chalk that up to superior craftsmanship. All right, he's open!
Chunlan and Sayu jumped to give themselves some space from the Oni before opening fire on him for another round. At the same time, Dao lashed out with a fresh kick from behind, followed by what was to be a vigorous punch to the tattooed back, if the Oni hadn't stopped it first.
No, Dao!
Screamed Sayu. A stone spear had sliced open Dao's side, one especially jagged from being formed in the Oni's haste to defend himself. The nimble Dao sunk to his knees after falling into the trap, blood dripping heavily from the wound. Though the spear's point had missed anything vital, any kind of wound that slowed one down before such a ruthless man was a fatal one.
Damn it! There's got to be a way to save Sayu at least!
Dao forced a burst of his depleted strength to roll out of the way of the Oni's accompanying attacks, while Chunlan fired shot after shot to try and pin their opponent down. Just as the young man came face to face with their impending defeat, Sayu piped up with a strange question.
Hey, Chunlan, is there a one-way tunnel or well of some kind around here? Like a really deep one?
Chunlan was taken aback, but he also trusted there was a purpose behind it. With the Oni's full attention on Dao, the two quickly exchanged words.
Yeah, one ways down. It's a cave about 10 arch deep, but there's only one way to get in or out. So what do you have in mind?
Something that's a gamble.
Well, with how things look right now, I've got no problem betting all my chips on you.
Sayu smiled.
Thanks. I think as long as I have a closed-off space, I can unleash it. The blade of the thundering sky's full power.
Chunlan instantly understood just what that power was. A traveling priest had taught and demonstrated as much to him through a series of natural science lessons.
All right, you guys will need to head straight down the trail you chased Raiju up. You should find a cave there before long.
What about you, Chunlan?
You'll need some time to prep, right? I know this mountain like the back of my hand. I'll keep him busy.
This was, in the Matagi's mind, the best way to repay his debt and show that he had full trust in the Woodland Wanderer. To be continued. Chapter 14. The Rage of a Beast. There was no reason to hesitate. Having been freed from his own fate, Chunlan could now dedicate every last bit of his remaining strength to helping his companions. He fired off several more rounds, and Dao, either knowing Chunlan's intent or inspired to act through Sayu's cry, rushed to his feet and darted through an opening in the Oni's defenses.
Always so quick to flee, mouse,
the Oni spat.
Hey, I'm your opponent now,
Chunlan demanded.
You know, the one who stole Raichu's kill from you?
The Oni turned toward the calling gunshots aimed at his back, watching Dao flee from the corner of his eye before presenting a bloodthirsty smile to his opponent.
You think you can fight me alone, Matagi?
Damn right I can! It's my duty to protect this mountain, so you gotta get through me first!
A dark laugh was elicited from the man.
I've always appreciated those who don't know their own limits. Come and let me have a taste of the power that took down the King of Thunder.
The Oni had completely fallen for Chunlan's provocation, but something didn't feel right about it. A shadow of doubt crossed Chunlan's heart as he wondered just how this man, of all men, could fall for such a simple ploy.
This man kills Woodland Wanderers to make himself stronger,
he thought to himself.
But is he really after their artifacts? Is it just about the hunt?
Chunlan ran, bidding the Oni to follow. As he did, he pondered his own questions further, creating yet more questions about this strange enemy they faced. On the surface, he hunted for artifacts on behalf of some unknown clan. This later turned into an excuse to hunt the Woodland Wanderers and kill them for his own personal gain. Which was his true purpose now, then? Was it orders? or lust for blood.
Well, whichever one it is, I still can't let him off the hook.
Chunlan shook the question off with a final thought on the matter. He had to defeat the Oni, purpose known or unknown, even if he felt a twinge of pity toward a human who somehow lost his sanity to war-hungry impulses. Guiding the enemy with carefully aimed shots, Chunlan brought him to a stretch of mountain barren of outcroppings or trees, its flat terrain creating a thick, undisturbed blanket over the ground. Its slant made it an ideal spot for sledding, but it had been left untouched by humans.
"Here I thought you'd lead me on a merry chase,"
snarled the Oni.
"Did you underestimate me? Because I may well have overestimated you."
You sure about that?
In the same instant, Chunlan's rifle fired as he whirled around to avoid the Oni's fist striking the ground. The bullet that flew through the air was reduced to a harmless spark by a rock wall. Or would have been, had all gone to plan.
"Impossible! My wall! Why?"
The wall formed by the Oni was too low to cover his body, and the bullet instead grazed off the very top of the wall and pierced the target's shoulder.
"How did it stop? What did you do?"
Nothing. Take a look around.
Their current battlefield was a sea of snow, a place where the rocks so desperately needed for the Oni's defense were buried deep enough to be difficult to retrieve on the fly. The man's face twisted with enough disgust at the revelation that it seemed to change the script of the arcane writings tattooed over him.
I'm going to ask you again. What are you?
Despite revealing just how he bested him in their current environment, Chunlan felt he was in no position to take further advantage of it.
You're hungry for more power when you don't even have a full grasp of the power you already have. So you murder Woodland Wanderers? I know you're not all there, but even then, I'm having a hard time understanding you.
The more he spoke, the more his anger fell to pity. He knew the emptiness of having lost one's purpose in life, as much as he now knew the joy of finding value in purpose again. This man's purpose, simple in declaration, yet far more complex than claimed, had at some point become distorted.
Somewhere along the way, your reason for fighting and your reason for living somehow got jumbled together.
Realizing this, Chunlan felt if he prodded further, he might just see into the man's heart. He noticed the color drain from the Oni's skin, a kind of apprehension that came when one's self was being exposed.
You said your power was gifted to you, right? Did that inspire you? Or give you purpose? Or were you just told what your purpose was?
Shut up!
All of the Oni's tattoos began to flash a reddish-black glow, while giving off a heat strong enough to burn his very flesh. Chunlan had never seen anything like it. He felt dwarfed in the shadow of this sinister glow before him.
Bullseye, huh?
Don't you taunt me! What could you possibly understand about me?
The Oni spat.
I should have died when they took my home, but I'm here. So who could condemn me for wanting power? For wanting to feed this hunger?
The Woodland Wanderers took your home? That doesn't sound like them at all. Or was that something someone told you too?
Chunlan had no interest in his opponent's life story, sorrowful as it appeared to be. The Oni, his driving forces being laid bare, in turn spoke in a low but powerful snarl, as the madness of his movements grew more frantic.
Kill. Hunt. I love to devour the Woodland Wanderers, but you should understand this hunger, fellow hunter. Why I would want to make a meal out of you.
This isn't some hunt! I could never accept what you're doing as hunting!
They fought on, evenly matched in offense and defense. Despite having been robbed of his advantage in reason, the Oni showed no sign of slowing his frenzy. He could not throw makeshift spears in an instant, so he raised what he could of a shield as he rushed the Matagi. Chunlan fell back, step by step, all the while firing at the wall barreling toward him. Chunlan was struck by the hollowness of the Oni's existence as they continued. It appeared his hunger was only a terrible greed that would never be satisfied.
We Matagi hunt to live, to accomplish our goals, to face life! Don't lump our traditions with your meaningless slaughtering!
Then, what have I been fighting for? Are you saying I really killed and killed for nothing, Matagi?
Chunlan knew he could never lose against such a man. How could someone fighting to discover his own goals, someone fighting to protect others, someone now fighting to inherit all his people had to give, ever lose against one who destroyed to fill an impossible void? Leaning his weight onto the rock wall built up, the Oni rushed headlong down the slope. It was as though he wanted to use all of his destructive self and all the pressure building within to crush Chunlan whole.
How should I know if you don't know? But what I do know is you not knowing the answer will spell your loss on this mountain!
Chunlan felt none of this pressure, however, for it all rang as hollow as the Oni's self in his eyes. He was full from reason for being and forged bonds, and he could draw from those strengths however he needed to conquer his foe. The Oni lashed out with a hard, heavy stone pole, but the attack did nothing but send the air and snow dancing.
I missed. Where are you?
Right in front of your face!
Chunlan was gliding over the snow on a wooden plank, a piece of a cabin that once stood on the remote slope. In his rage, the Oni cared not if his own sight was blocked by his rock wall and had continued charging forward wildly, completely missing that Chunlan was preparing his getaway.
No matter,
stuttered the Oni.
The snow around here is more shallow. The advantage is mine again!
Indeed, seeing the ground starting to poke through the snow and pockets gave the Oni the confidence to boast. If he could take down this brat who managed to see through the bravado that sustained him, then all would be well again. Little did he know, Chunlan had a good reason for leading the Oni to an area where his advantage would be lost.
A cave?
As they came in sight of the cave, Chunlan, ready to place his faith in the next step from his companions, threw aside the board and pushed the last of his energy into his legs.
What?
Chunlan immediately felt something was off in the place that should have brought him hope.
White haze. Is she not ready yet?
He had not expected the cave to be obscured by white fog. He turned back to his foe and, perhaps noticing Chunlan's confusion or simply basking in favorable terrain, the Oni shivered with delight. His tattoos began to pulse with light, shining so brilliantly, even the gleam in his eyes was lost from view. To be continued. Chapter 15. The Stone Melder Crumbles.
Sayu, I see Chunlan with the Oni. Looks like this is it.
This would be the place where the Woodland Wanderers and Matagi would end their fight against the man who terrorized them. Keeping watch outside the dead-end cave they holed up in, Dao could see their companion and sworn enemy approaching at a rapid pace. It was difficult for him to report to Sayu. Though he stopped bleeding, the wound in his side was painful enough to render him immobile. Still, Dao felt such pain was nothing compared to the opportunity to finally sever the chains of torment and nightmares this man had inflicted upon his people.
Sorry, Dao. I underestimated how tough this would be.
Sayu's response was uncharacteristically bitter. She was examining the bolts she had pierced into the walls of the cave, pulling some out when unsatisfied with their placement and adding them elsewhere. As she hopped here and there through the mist while clutching the blade of the thundering skies, there was a quiet determination in her eyes and, despite the frigid weather, a cold sweat dripped down her face from nerves.
What's wrong? I've never heard you doubt yourself like this. But if you got troubles, it's my job to share the burden with you.
From where Dao stood above the cave, he couldn't see her expression, nor did he know exactly what she was attempting to do from the inside, yet he knew her voice well, as much as he believed unwaveringly that against all her anxiety, whatever the problem, they would overcome as a team.
It's the artifact. It's taking longer than I thought to figure out,
responded Sayu.
I think being half inside Raiju changed it somehow, like it's been augmented to better suit its lightning attacks.
I barely understood a word of that. But if you're struggling with it, it's not a complete loss, is it? Like your estimation on what it does isn't that far off?
It's not. So long as I have enough time, I should be able to make this work.
Sayu pushed herself to move faster as she used the bolts and the artifact to adjust the amount of mist and electricity in the cave. She could not afford to slow her hands, slick with condensation they now were, as even just a hair more impatience would risk harming her accuracy.
I'll go meet with Chunlan to buy you some more time then,
Dao said.
Then we'll jam that Oni into this hole as soon as you're good to go.
Leaping from the top of the cave, he waved and readied to take off toward Chunlan, who was already within enough range to hear him call out.
Tao, not with that wound!
Sayu cried.
The bleeding stopped, so I can handle another fight. I'll do whatever it takes to help you fulfill your goals, Sayu. It's what I live for.
Dao made a playful slapping of his bicep. Sayu was aware of how much control one required of their muscles to master Shin, but she knew he was only trying to reassure her. The only reason he could still run now was due to him flexing his core to reduce bleeding and prevent the wound from widening. They had no time to dress it with herbs or bandages.
And plus, I'll have Chunlan with me. Your plan'll work, so no more doubting, and just do what you gotta do to see this through.
Chunlan and the Oni had noticed Dao by this point, causing him to accelerate the burden on his body to enter the fray sooner. No matter how Sayu protested, he was going to fight.
Darn it, Dao. I wish your body could keep up with all the crap you put it through.
He was right, of course. Though she grumbled with worry and irritation, she had to trust her own thinking and focus on her end of the plan. Her cousin had always been there to protect her. She knew well she could leave her safety to him.
Are you sure you're okay to move around?
Chunlan shouted to Dao, alarm apparent in his voice.
Right back at you. But whether we're good or not, we gotta keep throwing down.
Chunlan understood that to mean Sayu still needed more time. That and Dao's arrival was proof enough. After glancing over to the fog-filled cave, the Matagi knew what he needed to do.
Bah, a little mouse,
the Oni said flatly, eyes now devoid of any emotion.
Good. I'll kill you too. I'll crush everything. Everything!
His tattoos reflected his bloodlust and rage through a reddish-black shade as they pulsed from his skin.
Well, aren't we looking extra demonic?
Dao quipped.
About time you started embracing the name we gave you. He's completely lost it,
Chunlan said.
There's no telling what he's going to do, so watch yourself. Doesn't that mean he'll just fall for traps even easier? I sure hope so.
As the Oni formed a massive stone blade over his arm, neither could tell if the roar elicited came from his voice or if the burst of color from his tattoos produced an audible shudder from the very air. The blade was a third of his arm and perforated the skin, its jagged, uneven surface seeming to shriek with the wind upon every wild swing. An instant after the two young men threw themselves to the side to avoid being struck, a large tree behind them seemed to explode, as though it were hit by lightning. Dao couldn't believe his eyes.
What is this? Has he been hiding this kind of power the whole time? I'd wager he didn't use it because of the strain it puts on his body, but I don't think we can afford to just sit here and wait for him to self-destruct.
The Oni was being driven by bloodlust, and only bloodlust by this point. Though the light had faded from his eyes, his body was being pushed to new, limitless heights by the madness burning within. Chunlan could feel it was the kind of rage that would not stop until everything around him and beyond was reduced to ash.
Even if we could, I don't have that kind of patience. Let's just beat the hell out of him, Chunlan, right here, right now. Way ahead of you.
As if to signal the start of the official battle, Chunlan fired off a shot at the flesh where the Oni's right hand melded into the weapon. A useless act, as it had been blocked by a stone wall now formed around his left hand.
Guess we'll still have to deal with those damn shields. Still on point with the most annoying things even when he's lost his marbles. Well, if we can't sneak in with little hits, we'll just have to use his big swings against him. On it!
It appeared the stone merging into his flesh was beginning to restrict the Oni's breathing, but through blood-soaked swings he continued to fight with his blade.
Get down!
His next strike was horizontal. Both felt their hair being tugged by the chaotic winds as the edge passed over their heads. Dao then took this moment as a chance to counter.
Your stomach's wide open! Time for some payback! No, Dao, not yet!
But Dao persisted before Chunlan's shout could stop him. He transformed all his pain into anger, unleashing it all into a single attack at his foe's exposed torso.
And another!
The first blow was immediately followed by a roundhouse kick at the Oni's leg. However, the one sent flying this time was not the demon, but Dao. Even after throwing all his weight into the sweep, the Oni still had more than enough power to launch small but tremendous counterattacks with his left hand.
Come on!
Dao sputtered between coughs after landing.
You're telling me he's just as fast on his feet when he's out of control? If he can still block bullets, of course he can counter a kick.
Chunlan spat with exasperation.
When I said use his big swings against him, I meant we should control where he goes. Look.
The ground at the Oni's feet appeared as though a deep footprint shape had been dug out of it. He was swinging massive amounts of rock, much heavier than himself, with unfathomable, unmanageable power, and with each swing, he was naturally spun round by its momentum. Their enemy followed with a third attack. Chunlan jumped in the opposite direction of Dao and toward the cave where Sayu was waiting. The fog was getting progressively thinner.
We've bought her a good amount of time so far. It can't be that much longer. That's right. Doesn't matter how we get him there. This ends the same way.
Dao bounded before the Oni to feign a foolish frontal attack.
Good of you to line up for the slaughter!
Howled the Oni as he lashed his blade downward, cutting nothing as Dao dropped the feint and jumped nimbly away.
Can't believe you'd fall for something so obvious. I hate your guts, but I might start feeling bad if this keeps up. Don't get cocky. If you eat one of those, you're done, so no messing around.
Chunlan's warning was followed by several shots to seal the Oni's movements. The Oni aimed a counter toward Chunlan, but he had calculated the time between the attacks and dodged with ease. The Matagi and the Woodland Wanderer continued their pattern of baiting, attacking, and dodging counters, baiting, attacking, and dodging counters again, with each heavy swing bringing their target closer to the cave. They repeated it until they heard a clear bass sound that signaled to them that Sayu had exited the cave and the end of the battle was near.
That's the conch. Sayu's ready.
Chunlan noticed that the fog had completely cleared from the cave.
Come on, Stone Melder! Into your grave you go!
Standing prominently with arms spread at the mouth of the cave, he taunted one last attack out of the demon. Instead of swinging again, the Oni let the blade crumble and leaped for his prey using the rocky shield on his left arm instead.
One last push, huh?
Chunlan muttered under his breath. Yet, he did not flinch in the face of this direct assault. At that moment, words from Sayu through the vagabond flashed across his mind.
Hit the unexpected with the unexpected.
So Chunlan did just that. Rather than counter the Oni's barreling strike, Chunlan stood still, took a deep breath, and rolled backward into the cave.
Dao! Got it!
Dao dove in behind the man, after grabbing Chunlan's arm as he lay entangled in the Oni's grip on the ground, unleashed Shin.
See ya, Rocks for Brains! It's the end of the line for you!
The Oni doubled over and fell, releasing his grip just as Dao used the momentum of the attack to pull himself and Chunlan safely back out of the cave.
Your rampage ends here!
Still sailing through the air with Dao, Chunlan aimed one last shot into the cave and fired. It seemed to course through the air with the will of the man who fired it, flying unerringly within the cave toward the Oni's head, a brisk whistle following its path. The Oni raised his stone shield to block it, and right then, sparks engulfed in a flash of light as bright as the sun. That lone shot had become a fireball that consumed all that dwelled within the cave, taking the Oni along with it. To be continued. Chapter 16. Clinging to what is precious. Another cursed fate had been severed. After the flames erupted and the explosion continued unceasingly, the brittle rocks of the cave collapsed, forever sealing the demon within.
Yo!
Dao reacted with surprise coupled with pain as his back was slammed against the snowy ground. Looking up at the cave, he was met with an even greater surprise. He knew their plan would be enough to bring down the inside of the cave, but its outer shell was crumbled as well, carving a new base into the landscape. With balance lost, the loose, unnaturally broken stones started sliding away, taking much of the slope with it.
Was it meant to do all that? This full-on cave-in must have been the Oni,
Chunlan replied.
He couldn't block an explosion from every direction with his powers, but he probably messed with as many of the rocks inside as he could before his death. So his habit of pulling out rocks from his surroundings to make shields just made things worse for him this time. Makes sense, but no way did he cause that huge an explosion. Was that the blade of the thundering skies?
I don't know, but I'm sure she could tell you.
At some point, they had been rejoined by Sayu, who stood by to observe what just transpired. Unlike her companions, there was no hint of surprise on her face.
That was a hydrogen explosion. The logic is simple. The true purpose behind the artifact is to collect and deconstruct water molecules, so I just gathered them up in a cave and had Chunlan ignite it.
Sayu!
Dao cried with joy.
You're all right! Are you hurt at all? I have no idea what you just said, but as long as you're okay, I'm okay.
In one ear, out the other. What about you, Dao? Are you okay? Even after using Shin again?
Dao reacted with a grimace as though the question reminded him he was indeed severely injured. All around him, the snow was dyed a deep red.
Tao! Damn! Guess the wound opened up,
he grunted.
Can't believe I screwed up this bad.
It's okay, I think. The wound's only opened up a little bit. But that doesn't mean you're good to move around just yet. Lay back for me.
Yeah, sorry. But thanks.
Sayu procured some herbs and bandages from her pouch. Chunlan wanted to help, but as he tried to sit up, he was overcome with a wave of exhaustion and numbness in his legs, and fell right back down.
Not you too, Chunlan. I'm fine,
he reassured Sayu.
I think all the adrenaline from fighting is just finally catching up to me. I'm nowhere near as bad off as Dao.
After inspecting Chunlan's wounds, Sayu seemed to believe he was telling the truth, and she quickly returned to patching up Dao. Still, her worries were getting the better of her, and she would glance in his direction now and again between her work.
I really am fine. Just let me rest for a bit,
he said, voice weak with an overwhelming drowsiness.
If you don't have any medicine to perk me up, then I'll just sleep for a bit. It's not like I'll die or...
Chunlan trailed off. As his vision dimmed, he could have sworn he could see two people he recognized behind Sayu as the sunlight peeked from over her shoulder. The snow beneath him, cold as it was meant to be, felt more akin to a warm bed as he drifted off to sleep. A few hours later, Chunlan was awake and leaning with Sayu in the shade of a tree as they watched the sun continue to rise. Though they weren't looking at one another as they spoke, gazing into the same sky in peace gave them a deeper sense of connection than doing so ever would.
I wish I could have learned what the Oni's deal was,
Sayu mused.
I still have a whole lot of questions. And I wish I could tell you,
Chunlan responded.
But I will say that toward the end, I did feel kind of sorry for him. It felt like something was pushing him to a point where there was no turning back, even if he wanted. You thought so too. Though I suppose it's all a moot point now. He attacked, and we defended ourselves. That was all.
Dao slept soundly near a pile of straw the two managed to put together. According to Sayu, the worst was over, and he would recover. At the same time, they both looked over to the collapsed cave along the slope. There was no sign of movement. Mount Whitecrown had its natural silence returned to it at last.
I think I finally get why you can walk your path without hesitation,
Chunlan said.
Do you? In a way that will help you along your own path? Yeah, I think it will.
Chunlan had dreamed briefly that he was reunited with his father. They exchanged no words, but the dream was a simple one, unclouded by indiscernible emotions. His father told him he was proud of him, that he could now move on to find his next goal in life. And, after ruffling his son's hair much as he did so often while still living, he disappeared. It was enough to remind Chunlan why he was always so bound by everything his father told him.
I've always wanted my life to have meaning,
Chunlan continued.
I wanted meaning to feel like a Matagi. Meaning to know I was really facing life, as my dad had put it. And not knowing how to find it left me at a standstill. But after meeting you and just giving everything into seeing your goal completed, I think I better get what he meant. Meaning isn't something to search for or justify in the moment. It's something you find when you look back on what's been done. If I can think back on the life I've faced, and see that it meant something to me, then I've already fulfilled our beliefs as a Matagi.
Though weaved into another's path, he found something new and wonderful about himself that he never would have found otherwise.
I guess that makes us opposites.
Sayu let out a small chuckle followed by the brightest, widest smile Chunlan had seen from her yet. Having lowered his gaze from the environment surrounding them to meet hers, Chunlan was left to wonder how such an unrefined smile could feel so serene at the same time. So clear were her eyes then, that he could even see himself in them, a face with a similarly brilliant, warm expression that he could almost not recognize. Feeling suddenly sheepish from watching her for too long, he turned away.
Opposites? Well, for me, I feel like meaning comes first. Before I do anything, I make sure there's a meaning behind the decisions I'm making.
Wow. Then we really are just as opposite as you can get. Since Sayu had faith that her every action would be worth something, she never had to look back and wonder if what she had done was worthwhile. Chunlan, however, thought it better to look back at what was done and glean a new, more solid foundation from the path already forged.
I'll always be stuck in the past, I guess,
he whispered.
I don't think that's true.
Sayu pointed his attention to the blade of the thundering skies.
I think you're a little more like me than you think. We never could have won this fight without you. In fact, I'd say we won our battles because you trusted that your help would turn the tides in our favor. Maybe I'm a little more like you than I think, too. Our paths and goals just happened to cross,
Sayu continued.
But here we are now, looking back and having gotten something out of this coincidental experience. Meaning.
Both sides brought something to themselves that day, working to cover for each other's weaknesses in order to overcome a series of great trials as a team. Despite their short time together, they knew that what they managed to achieve was no small accomplishment.
So it sounds to me like you were able to find what you were looking for.
Kind of. Chunlan did have an answer, but he felt it was one among many possible answers to be discovered. Yet for now at least, it was enough to give him a direction to start walking.
Not sure if I'll be able to stick to the path I've found the way you guys have. I think you'll be fine. You remind me of the Matagi who showed me mine, and also of how I was when I first met him.
Chunlan still did not know who that vagabond was who showed Sayu her way all those years ago, but he was grateful for the great change he brought in her. In that sense, Chunlan could very much see how he was like the lost little girl the Matagi had guided.
I wonder what he was looking for in his travels, Chunlan pondered, and where he was going.
He thought about the past 2 days some more, and he was left with the sense that he had closed a journey he never thought to track. He met new people he could trust, unbound himself from a broken past, and found courage that would see him to a mended future in such an unimaginably short amount of time, and he was so very proud of it all. What a sweet feeling it was to realize his life was worth living.
This might be a big gamble on my part, but maybe it'd be a good idea to take up new trails. Continue searching for an even bigger path to walk. Like you guys.
And so, Chunlan decided he would take his first steps toward the future. There was no firm road to guide him, but he trusted, with most certainty, that the beaten path walked would look incredible when he turned back around to admire it. To be continued. Finale. Matagi. A month passed. March heralded the beginning of spring. For most, this would mean flowers and sunshine. For Mount Whitecrown, however, snow was still falling and falling, piling into heavy blankets along the ground. Those who lived on the mountain knew her mannerisms well, and they felt in their bones that this particular spring had come on much quicker and was far milder than in previous years. Still, there were fewer blizzards to chase travelers off its winding trails, and green bamboo shoots could be seen poking their heads out of thinner patches of white. The elderly residents of the Matagi's village remarked that this was the true spring of Mount Whitecrown they remembered from their youth. Chunlan thrust a sturdy stick through a bag of his belongings and stepped out of the door of his home. He walked down a path leading to the village, thinking along the way of how that path, small as it was, came with so many meaningful discoveries. The last year had been full of such little things, and if he could find them through a hunting path like this one, then he was certain to discover an unfathomable wealth on the new, far longer trail ahead of him.
Leaving on schedule? You're a punctual lad, Chunlan.
As Chunlan passed through the village before the sun had even risen, as though he were waiting for him, he heard the voice of the chief calling out to his back. Chunlan had intentionally gotten his farewells out of the way the night before, so he could leave in the morning when everyone was still in bed. You should still be asleep. The goodbyes were what yesterday was for, Chief.
You think an old man like me can't rise and shine this early in the morning?
The chief harumphed.
I spend many a long adventurous night out camping for wild game, you know. I can get up early for something this important.
I know this isn't quite what you were hoping for, but I think I'll be a better man for it. So thank you for that. Really. Chunlan was long overdue to say this to the man, for it had been too long since he expressed his gratitude, and the times he expressed it were too few on the whole. Even as he said it, he was relieved it was still too dark for the flushed expression on his face to be visible. He always felt that the elders saw him as a burden. He was the last of his generation in this village, a pedigree youth trained by his father, the previous chief, who had himself been trained by a Matagi of legend. What a waste of potential he was for his lack of confidence or direction in life. Surely they begrudged him for being their final option as the next to carry on their will, and would be glad to see him gone. But when he announced his desire to leave, all of them, led by the chief, worked their hardest to convince him to do otherwise out of a genuine want for his presence. It wasn't until he explained his motives that they agreed the journey would be an excellent character-building exercise for their future chief, and welcomed the idea with warmth. It is often said that children are unaware of just how precious they are to their parents, and Chunlan now imagined this to be the case with him and the village.
Hoped for? You found your pride as a Matagi. That's more than what I could have hoped for. Your father and Master Kyun would also be very proud.
I'd like to think that. Thank you, Chief. I promise I'll find a way of giving back to this place after everything it's given me. Chunlan felt the village needed to bet on the winds of change. He was nowhere near ready to lead as the next chief, but if he could continue cultivating meaning in life worthy of that high station, he was confident he could be part of ushering in a new age for his people. Last month, I was able to put something behind me after years of stagnation, he told the chief. I acted as a Matagi to save others, and upheld our ways to eliminate that which threatened them. I want to find more of what changed me then, in the rest of the world.
Oh, you were less stagnant than you realize. You haven't changed all that much in my eyes, even.
You think so? Chunlan was caught off guard by this. He was certain he would be told how much he'd changed in so short a time. To him, his horizons had expanded far beyond anything he had known before, transforming him into someone unrecognizable from the man he was.
You've never been able to ignore someone in need. All you did last month was just that. I'd say it was perfectly in line with how you've always been.
It was true. It was this very instinctive habit that had been the catalyst for him to meet the young girl and start his whole adventure. If there was, in fact, a connection between his impulse to help others and his constant struggle to find meaning in his meager existence, then perhaps he really had changed very little.
Almost forgot to say,
the chief began, a noticeably lighter shift in his voice now present to account for Chunlan's downcast gaze.
The preserving of Raiju's body is almost finished. Are you sure you don't want it? It was you and your father's goal for so long. You have every right to claim it.
Oh, that. True to tradition, once it was confirmed that the Oni was no longer a threat, the Matagi had retrieved the corpse of Raiju and stuffed it. It was a method of displaying that the danger had passed, and the mountain had continued being protected from impurities by human hands. It was also a great symbol of pride, as the Matagi were always quick and sure to assign the glory of an arduous kill.
Are you sure it's all right to leave it in the village square?
It's fine. There's no space for it in my house. And besides, I hunted it to cut ties with it, and my past.
Then the rest of us will be sure to take good care of it. It will make for a wonderful reminder of how you protected us, for generations to come.
Chunlan gave a small nod of approval, If his old regret could be transformed in such a way, then he welcomed it.
Well then, I'm off.
Now, with no such heaviness to weigh him down, his greatest worry was how much meaning he could absorb in the great, wide world to make his own. Would he find anything at all? Would he meet his newfound companions who changed so much of him again? Would they see how much he had grown after what he would come to learn? Casting these bubbling thoughts of anxiety aside, Chunlan turned away and departed. Even if many an obstacle or trial arose from his new path, he knew he possessed the means to overcome them. After all, he was a Matagi. He could face whatever life had to throw at him.
You take care, Chunlan. We'll be waiting for your return,
the chief said to himself, standing and watching till he could see the young man's back no more. Once he was out of view, he turned his gaze to the relic beside him of Kiyun Olkis, pulled out a gourd of sake from his robe, and sprinkled some of it over the monument before resting his back against it.
I don't know if you remember his face, Kiyun, but the son of your disciple just left saying the same things you did.
The smile on the chief's face was different from the one of support he had shown Chunlan. It was not a youthful grin, but closer to a nostalgic grin, often worn in his youth as he thought back to his younger years.
You said this whole continent was one big mountain, that we were merely at one of its summits, and to discover what truly was to be faced in life, we needed to discover all it had to give us. I don't claim to understand such grand ideals, but then, call me a simple man, plenty content watching over our little home as it is right now.
The relic sparkled as it bathed in the light of the morning sun.
He took down Raiju, and even a demon. The way he is now, I think he'll more than understand what you meant by the end of his journey.
Chunlan had seen off Sayu and Dao 2 days after the Oni's defeat. As soon as their wounds were healed, they felt it their duty to rejoin their people, let them know the threat that long plagued them was no more, and make their way to their shrine. He found it strange just how much he learned about them when he reflected back on that brief 2-day period of recovery. There they had been, forced to uncover one another's combative strengths and weaknesses out of necessity, placing a deep trust in one another that would ordinarily take years to develop. And then there they were, the storm that brought them together having passed. It was upon this respite that both sides realized they hardly knew who the other was at all. They then gathered around the tables as friends, teaching each other their ways in detail. From there, Chunlan learned much about the Woodland Wanderers, beyond what he saw in that book, and Sayu and Dao listened with gripping interest about the many traditions of the Matagi around them. These conversations sparked his desire to depart. There had been a reason Sayu walked her path, something behind her unshakable faith that her every action along that path held meaning, and it stemmed from the vagabond Matagi and the book he gave her. Through its lengthy contents, Sayu grew increasingly curious about how her people fit into the puzzle around them, wondering if she could unveil new meaning to their ways by discovering a more personal purpose through them. Chunlan hoped for much the same. If he could discover more about himself through the new path he was choosing to walk, would he, too, be able to return home a more complete person and put his experiences to use? Their goals were not to do away with old traditions, but to find new ways to celebrate them by creating better selves. The two swore they would meet one another again, not just as friends, but as sides that would continue to inspire one another to new heights. Chunlan dearly hoped that by the time their paths crossed, he would be the kind of person who could expand Sayu's world that much more, bringing yet another dimension to her ever-growing journey. The world was a very big place. From their brief interaction, even the small world Chunlan had always known, the snowy mountain slopes and its many winding trails, were seen in a new light. If he could learn so much from what he thought familiar, what else could he gain from running wild and taking in the great unknown? Sayu told him that the vagabond saw the world as one big mountain. If Chunlan saw it the same way, then he was merely off to explore this mountain's many slopes, on the hunt for prey not yet seen. Despite its grander scale, this journey and his actions were, in essence, still so very like a Matagi's.
See you when I see you.
Chunlan thought to himself of the Woodland Wanderer. eagerly awaiting the day he could be the second Matagi in her life, to unequivocally shift her life's course for the better. No Matagi could sleep through the roaring of beasts in the night. Chunla and Aizen, now officially a vagabond, had been wavering on the borders of dreams regarding the day of his departure one moment. In the next, he was on his feet in the bed of a mini pickup truck. His trusted surube, his old-fashioned muzzle loader, held firmly in his hands. Every surrounding truck that made up a caravan had skidded to a similar halt, their cargo bed passengers being jerked awake from bumpers being smacked in minor collisions from the unexpected stop. Chunlan scanned the surrounding area for any irregularities, picking up on the source quickly. A swath of unidentified bears surrounding the truck, leading the caravan. With incredible haste, he then leaped from the bed of the truck and rushed forward to assist them. He could have sat in silence and waited for the danger to pass while admiring the tiny peak of Mount Whitecrown still visible in the far-off distance, but that simply was not who he was. His instinctive habit of diving headfirst into helping others persisted even beyond the home he left behind. Once something he thought of as patronizing or unnecessary, he now fully celebrated it for the experiences it could gift him in retrospect. His journey had only just begun. To where on this mountain Chunlan would go, he did not know. All he could say for certain was that by the time he reunited with his heroic friends, somewhere along its meandering slopes, he would be a prouder self for it. The end. Narrated by Ethan Bradford. Thank you for listening.